Story 1.
Husband publicly served cheating wife divorce papers, then vanished from her life without a word. Hello, hi sweetheart. It's wonderful to hear your voice again. I have to admit it was quite a challenge finding a new phone number for either of you. So, how are things going on your end? Linda asked softly, attempting to conceal her excitement while masking the fear and sadness she truly felt. Stacy hesitated momentarily before opting for caution. New phone, who's this? Stacy interjected. Stacy, for goodness sake, it's me, your mom. I apologize for not calling sooner, but I hoped you'd recognize your mother's voice after all these years, Linda replied, her tone tinged with frustration. Stacy smiled faintly. She immediately recognized her mother's voice, but chose to proceed with extreme caution, given the circumstances. Her carefulness also allowed her to address her absent mother's emotional absence without appearing rude. Oh, hi, Mom, she finally responded. You caught me off guard, and I was just being cautious. I don't want to fall prey to some telephone stalker. Stacy paused again, contemplating before objecting to her mother's claim of loving and raising her for over 17 years. She maintained her composure but wasn't willing to forego expressing polite disagreement. Mom, I don't believe the past 3 years qualify as your care or affection. I was almost 14 when you left, and this call marks the first contact from you in 3 years. I'm already 17, and I've been without your maternal love for a long time. Linda sighed heavily. I'm truly sorry, Stacy. Back then, everything was incredibly challenging, and I felt I had no choice but to leave. But let's not dwell on that. I genuinely called to check on you and possibly speak with your siblings if they're around. Now that things have settled, I intend to be more present for you. I hope we can reconnect, sweetheart, and you can enjoy the benefits of having a wealthy mother. With Frank and I married, there's much I can do for all my children, you, Rachel, and Josh. Our life now is far better than it was with your father. Don't misunderstand, darling. Your dad is a good man, but he couldn't provide the luxuries Frank does now. He pampers me daily, and I adore it, Linda's voice brimmed with enthusiasm. Now I want to show you kids what real life is about, the way it's meant to be. And I'll also make up for those challenging years when we struggled due to your father's modest income. Hopefully, this will alleviate the guilt of leaving you abruptly. By this point, Stacy could barely contain her anger, simmering with resentment. She deeply loved her father, Ed Mercer, and admired him for shouldering the responsibilities of single parenthood and enduring the heartache when Linda departed. Ed had to step up as a single parent, raising 2 daughters, one grappling with teenage issues, the other just 10, alongside a wild 20-year-old son. Stacy also took immense pride in her father's transformation of their lives following her mother's departure. Prior to leaving, Linda had emptied all the bank accounts, plunging the family into a financial crisis worse than Stacy could recall. At 14, young Stacy assumed the role of a homemaker, striving to assist her family's survival. United, the father and children endured a challenging period lasting over 8 months. Then life became more manageable as her father enacted significant changes, and now it's entirely wonderful. It would have been quite easy for Stacy to simply blame the main source of their suffering, her mother. In her 14th year, Stacy's well-known fiery temper lay in wait, ready to pounce. Suddenly, she experienced a wave of utter calmness, comprehending how to conduct herself and what she needed to do in a conversation with her mother, and it was marvelous. If she had confronted Linda at that moment, her mother would undoubtedly have hung up, and Stacy might never have reconnected with her. It wouldn't have benefited anyone, and Stacy truly desired to maintain a relationship with her mother despite her numerous mistakes. Embracing the feeling of calmness, Stacy decided how to proceed. She would voice her perspective, highlighting her mother's errors, yet simultaneously preserve the opportunity for the continuation of the relationship between the children and their mother. Yes, it was the correct approach. The young woman grinned broadly and suggested to Stacy that she might have just learned a significant life lesson. She excitedly told her mother about her stunning appearance and promised to send a picture using her phone's camera, asking her not to hang up. Stacy positioned herself in front of the mirror on her bedroom closet door, sunlight streaming through the window as it was around 4 in the mid-June evening. She smiled brightly into the mirror, showcasing her wheat gold hair styled in an elegant updo and her full-length lavender evening dress, which elegantly hugged her feminine figure. The floor-length dress was complemented by long white gloves ending just above her elbows, symbolizing Stacy's transformation from an awkward girl into a mature young lady. She took a couple of pictures, selected the best one, and promptly sent the selfie to her mother's cell phone. Impatiently, she asked if her mother had received the photo and urged her to share her thoughts. A long pause followed, during which Linda reflected on the impact of the past 3 years on her blossoming daughter. Linda expressed her amazement at Stacy's beauty, struggling to find the right words as she fought back tears and a lump in her throat. She then expressed how much she missed Stacy and acknowledged her daughter's immense growth, questioning her own actions. Despite Linda's confused murmuring, Stacy proceeded. She mentioned how stunning Rachel would be and went to her younger sister's room, where she found Rachel putting the final touches on her. Long, thick, honey-brown hair with an elegant updo framing her face. Rachel's hair cascaded down in gentle curls. Her large blue-gray eyes and soft features captivated many. Rachel's face was strikingly beautiful, with her slightly upturned nose and dimpled smile adding to her charm. Like Stacy, Rachel was dressed in an evening gown, exuding delicate elegance, albeit in a more understated manner compared to her older sister's attire. "Hey, come on, pose for a photo. Mom's on the line and I'll send her your picture," Stacy said, circling around her sister to find the perfect angle to capture Rachel. Assisting her was a woman around 35, also donned in an evening gown designed to make a lasting impression. This woman exuded a regal beauty that turned heads wherever she went. She noticed the smartphone aimed at her and Rachel and started to step out of the frame, but Stacy intervened, gesturing for her to stay put. "No, Janice, stay right there. I want you in the photo too," Stacy insisted. Rachel, still a bit surprised, eventually rolled her eyes and, cupping her hands around her mouth like a megaphone, shouted toward the phone, "Hello, ma'am. Can't chat now, but let's catch up later." Moving around the room, Stacy snapped several shots of Rachel and Janice before signaling they were done. "All set, ladies. I'll pick the best one and send it off." After a pause, Stacy held the phone to her ear and exclaimed, "I bet you wouldn't recognize Rachel now. I mean, Mom, R even has curves." Rachel blushed and retorted, "Stacy, you're such a dork. Be quiet." But a shy smile crept onto her face as the other women giggled at her playful embarrassment, prompting Stacy to refocus on the phone. "So, what do you think, Mom?" Linda struggled to find the words, clearly amazed. "My goodness, I'm speechless, honey. You both look stunning. You've grown so much and are so beautiful. I'm incredibly proud of both you and Rachel. I wish I could be there beside you right now." Linda kept pulling the phone away from her ear to look at the photos of her daughters, whom she missed dearly. Her maternal heart ached with longing and regret. She hastily wiped her teary eyes, focusing on the details of the pictures. "Listen, Stacy, why are you both dressed up like that? You're not both going to prom, are you?" she asked, perplexed. Stacy had successfully piqued her mom's interest and was now poised to flaunt it. "No, Mom, it's even better than prom. Remember that annual soiree you were always envious of but never got involved in? That grandiose summer evening gala hosted by the Sedgwicks and McTaggarts?" Linda immediately recalled. "Yes, of course I do. That ball was always the social event of the year. Gosh, I'd give anything to attend that reception. Only the most influential and glamorous people in the entire state get invited." Linda's voice carried a wistful tone. "I've always longed for the chance to don a beautiful evening gown and mingle with the social elite. It would be a dream come true," Linda sighed sentimentally before snapping back to reality. "Oh my goodness. Did you and Rachel land jobs as hostesses or waitresses at that party? Wow, this is incredible. I'm so proud of both of you. Just imagine, my daughters will be there at the reception, mingling with all those high society folks," Linda exclaimed, marveling at the picture that unfolded before her. No, Mom, Rachel and I aren't working as staff. We're invited guests," Stacy shared with her mother the secret they had, with Rachel brimming with pride and excitement. "And what's more, we'll be seated at the main table because Dad is the guest of honor at the event. It's a surprise for him, but the organizers will give him special recognition. Isn't that super cool? I'll even be one of those taking part in the ceremony. Oh my Mom, I'm just so nervous but, at the same time, incredibly excited." Linda was utterly taken aback. "What? You must be joking, right, Stacy? Honey, you've got to be joking. Why would a humble cost control clerk be invited to such an esteemed event and as the guest of honor, no less? Huffing, that's just not something that happens in real life, okay? Come on, honey, admit it, you're just pulling my leg, right?" "Well, yes, of course, Mom," the eldest daughter chuckled. "Of course, Rachel and I dress to the nines every day just to await your call and deliberately tease you. Let's be realistic, Mom. A lot has changed since you left us. We were in immense pain, no, we were all utterly devastated. But Dad managed to bring us all together, even Josh, and somehow built a new life for us without you. Perhaps I should catch you up on what's happened since you left. We need to do this quickly because the limo with Fona and Josh should be back," she glanced at her watch, "in about 15 minutes. And then we'll all need to leave." Stacy took a deep breath to quell her anger before recounting their life after Mom. "Dad was practically shattered when he found out about you and some old guy in bed together. You disappeared right after he confronted you about it. Honestly, I think you were planning to leave anyway. You just had to move up the date a bit. At this juncture, Linda interrupted her daughter's story, whispering, "Sorry, Stacy. I didn't realize you knew about what went down between your dad and me. But, yeah, after he found out, I felt I had to split. What was the use of sticking around? He even had photos of us. Frank and I decided to ditch the city and shack up in his Manhattan apartment, and we've been there since. Stacy, I'm sorry your dad decided to spill the beans to you. If you want to know, I think it was pretty messed up to drag you kids into this mess." "Mom!" Unable to hold back, the girl yelled, stomping her foot in frustration. "This is, well, total crap." Stacy then tried to rein in her temper and the overwhelming emotions. She took a couple of deep breaths and then continued, speaking clearly. "Dad didn't spill anything to us. I told him about this." "Who do you think took those photos, huh?" "Yeah, that's right, Mom. That day, Rachel and I came home, and everything was quiet except for some weird noises from your room. I told Rachel to wait downstairs while I quietly went up to see what was up. When I saw you, I snapped pictures while lying on the bed and quickly sent them to Dad. Then Rachel and I left to hang out with friends. Later, when we got back that evening, you were holed up in your room crying. The next morning, you were gone. So the last image I have of my caring mother is her under some gross old man in Dad's room. Seriously, Mom, tell me I didn't need therapy to erase those ugly images from my mind. Thank goodness you two at least covered yourselves otherwise. I'd probably still be in therapy. I can't believe you're the one who betrayed me, Stacy." "How could you do this?" Linda exclaimed, a mix of frustration and indignation in her voice. "I don't think now's the time or place to trade barbs about betrayal, Mom. That'd be quite an uneven match, don't you think? I could unleash my fire hose against your water pistol at any moment, if you catch my drift. And let's not forget what Ra and Josh might have to say about you too. So, do you want to recap the past 3 years or what?" While talking to her mom on the phone, Stacy was inwardly surprised at how composed and rational she was handling the situation. She realized she had really grown and matured in the past few years. At that moment, Linda realized that to salvage any semblance of a relationship with her children in the future, she'd have to confront the harsh reality of responsibility for her actions and their repercussions. It wouldn't be an easy feat. A few gifts and occasional meetings wouldn't magically mend things. Something deeper was required. Her children must come to terms with the inevitable and adjust to life without her. Linda truly desired to understand how they were coping, but to do so, she must hear their feelings regarding her decisions and life choices. Did they all resent her? There was no escaping reality now. If she retreated, she'd likely lose them, possibly forever. However, if she intended to rebuild the relationship, she must acknowledge their emotions and allow their intense feelings to wash over her. Was she prepared for this? Was it all worth the pain she knew would inevitably follow? Linda gathered her resolve, her voice softened with regret over the phone. "Yes, Stacy, you're absolutely right. I suppose someday we'll have to sit down and thoroughly discuss all these matters. But for now, we must focus on restoring some semblance of communication. I reached out to reconnect with you, my children, and that's a good first step, don't you think? Now, let me hear about how your lives have unfolded after Linda's departure." Stacy couldn't wait to update her mother on the journey since her absence. She began excitedly recounting, "Mom, you won't believe what's happened. It's like something out of a novel, or even a fairy tale. Anyway, after you left, Dad went through a rough patch for a few months. It was tough. Many times when Rachel and I returned from school, I'd have her wait outside while I checked inside, fearing I might find Dad. You know, every phone call made me jump, fearing it might be the police, the hospital, or worse. I urged Josh to pull himself together, to stop drinking and partying because I couldn't be the sole anchor of the family. I think he made efforts, but he struggled to provide real support. Eventually one day, Dad began reading books about overcoming heartbreak, grief, and such. Often, at night, he'd lock himself in his room, and Rachel and I could hear the keys clicking on his computer keyboard. He poured his thoughts and feelings onto the screen, and I believe it helped him tremendously. Oh, and Mom, remember how overweight Dad was? Well, he started rising early to run, even dusting off the treadmill and weights, using them regularly. It seemed like he was pushing himself to embrace life again, which was uplifting to see. Stacy paused and thought for a moment, then said, "I'm guessing you probably don't want to know all this stuff about Dad. But it's really important in the grand scheme of what I'm trying to explain to you about our lives. So, I'm sorry if this isn't what you want to hear, but by the way, Dad looks pretty hot now." Even over the phone, it was clear that Stacy was smiling. No, it's okay, honey. I really needed to hear about this, but thank you for taking care of me and telling me about how everything happened for you. I really want to know how things are going with you, Rachel and Josh." Well, with Rachel, it's simple. After what happened, she seemed to shut down, retreat into herself, and remained in this sort of detached state for quite a long time. Now she's almost back to her old self, and you won't believe how well she's doing. A lot of it has to do with Janice. She and Rachel really became friends. Linda looked at the photo on her phone again and zoomed in, this time paying special attention to the woman who was helping Rachel get dressed. Okay, so who is this Janice you're talking about? Oh, sorry, Mom. Janice is Dad's girlfriend. Isn't she gorgeous? And she's so sweet. She is a former swimsuit model, but Janice is still involved in modeling. She really helped Rachel come out of her shell and now supports her desire to start a career in the modeling world. Stacy perked up, nearly jumping out of her bed when she remembered something. Oh, by the way, Mom, you should definitely pick up a copy of last month's Teen Fashion World magazine. Ra is on the cover, and she looks absolutely stunning. Recently, she has really become a very popular model. What? How? When did all this happen? First, your father hooked up with a girl half his age, and now she's selling your little sister to some dirty photographers. If only I knew what she was doing with the cheesecake photo, then I will bring charges against both your father and this Janet, or whatever her name is. The enraged Linda almost choked from the indignation that gripped her. Stacy held off on responding immediately to help calm the situation, then spoke softly to emphasize her point. Mom, Dad, and Janice are extremely careful. They handle all of Rachel's and my modeling work with great caution. One of them is always present at our shoots, and they make sure the photographer signs a strict contract with Dad. According to the terms, not a single photo can be taken without Dad's permission. Do you truly believe Dad would approve anything remotely suggestive? He won't even let Rachel wear a swimsuit. And about Dad's girlfriend, as I mentioned, her name is Janice. She's 34, which means there's an 11-year age gap between her and Dad. It's actually much less of a difference compared to you and Frankie. How old is he, 100? Anyway, I'm not sure if they'll ever get married, but from what I see, they're very compatible. Janice has been a great support to him, and Dad seems genuinely happy. I've never seen him this content. That's the situation, Mom. I'm being honest about what I observe and feel. Frank is only 66, not as old as you seem to think, Stacy interjected, her displeasure evident. I'm just unsure if modeling is the right path for Rachel. I believe she'd benefit more from pursuing something more meaningful. Stacy bit her tongue to prevent herself from losing her temper and blurting out something regrettable. She turned away from her cell phone and took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. Afterwards, she returned to the cell phone and continued speaking, disregarding the interruption. Rachel's modeling career has really helped her, Mom. She's much less shy now and exudes confidence and composure that she didn't have before. She's finally discovered her true self, her capabilities, and what she's truly passionate about. Sometimes she even takes charge in the studio or suggests creative-themed poses for her shoots. Mom, let's be real. Rachel was never a standout student and always saw herself as a failure, thinking her future held nothing good. But now she's poised to become a top-tier fashion model before finishing high school, with a bank account even you'd be proud of. And yes, Mom, I said that I also model, but it's not my passion. Rachel and I do fashion shows together, but I mainly serve as support, complimenting Rachel's looks or showcasing different outfits. The best part? Rachel and I have grown close, helping each other out and collaborating. Plus, I'm making good money, enough to save for college. Don't worry, I still enjoy school and maintain good grades. I'm even taking extra classes to graduate. Early for college. I still have an A average, but I'm a bit concerned about chemistry this year. It's a tough class, but I need to ace it for veterinary school. Stacy remembered something else and brightened up again, even giggling. Oh, Mom, you won't believe this. R and I get to keep some of the outfits from our shows and shoots, so now I have a really cool wardrobe. Can you imagine? I'm one of the most stylish girls in class now, not some geek. Many of the girls who used to think they were too cool are asking me for fashion tips, and some even want my autograph. Isn't it funny, albeit a bit nauseating? So Mom, I'm almost popular, and the best part, guys are starting to notice me. Stacy giggled. All this news greatly disturbed Linda, who had always struggled to achieve some level of recognition in society. She herself didn't know exactly what, but some kind of recognition. She left her family to pursue personal recognition, but it seemed her family members achieved success without her. What further aggravated the situation for Linda was that they achieved such stunning success, seemingly effortlessly. Linda sighed heavily. Baby, I'm glad everything's going well with you and your sister. By the way, though I'm hesitant to ask, how's Josh? Is he okay? Stacy took a deep breath and glanced at the clock, knowing Josh and Fona would arrive soon. She didn't want to rush discussing Josh's situation, fearing she wouldn't have enough time, but feeling confident she could share Josh's update with her mother. Stacy continued. Well, Mom, surprisingly, Josh has turned things around. You know, he was quite wild even before you left, and after that, he continued drinking and partying even more with his friends. For a while, he completely lost control. Eventually, Dad got really angry and demanded he quit partying and either get a job or go back to school. Well, he told Dad off, so eventually Dad kicked him out, telling him not to return until he found a job. Dad even had to call the cops a couple of times to get him out. Mother couldn't believe her ears. What? Your idiot father threw my son out? How dare he? I'll have Frank contact a lawyer and sue that scoundrel, Linda raged, clutching the phone and seething with anger. Well, good luck with that, Mom, Stacy said with a hint of irony. She knew her mother always favored Josh, letting him get away with anything, and Stacy knew Linda supported his antics by giving him money whenever he asked. In fact, she thought Josh was very lucky he never got into serious trouble. All this occurred a year and a half ago, Mom, and since then Josh and Dad have reconciled. Josh relied on his friends for a while, but even they grew weary of supporting his laziness and kicked him out. He spent some time living on the streets, but eventually realized he didn't like that lifestyle, especially seeing us doing well. So one day, Josh apologized to Dad and expressed his desire to come home. Dad maintained his get-a-job-first stance, so Josh found work on a roofing crew. After that, he returned home, but Dad insisted he contribute to living expenses to teach him responsibility. Stacy chuckled. It was amusing hearing him complain about his tough job and expenses, but Dad always said that's how the real world operates, and Josh needed to adapt. This continued until Fona entered the scene. Don't tell me Dad has a new girlfriend. Linda was indignant. Who, Fona? Stacy laughed. No, Mom, Fona is Dad's personal assistant. She's sharp-tongued and won't tolerate objections. Dad calls her his cool boss. Despite being only 22, she's competent and reliable. They met at a conference in Minneapolis. Fona approached him, shook his hand, and advised him to hire her for organizing trips, booking tickets, and managing expenses if he wanted real success. Impressed by her no-nonsense attitude, Dad hired Fona on the spot. Now she lives with us and Dad jokes about having his own harem. It's hilarious, Stacy laughed. Fona has been crucial in Dad's career development. She's like my big sister, and we all adore her. Oh, Mom, Fona is a real stunner from Norway. She's 5 feet 8 inches with a trendy haircut, short blonde hair and piercing light blue eyes. Poor Josh fell for her immediately, but Fona made it clear she wouldn't date someone without direction. Suddenly, Josh had newfound motivation. Stacy's tone turned serious as she shared the latest about her brother. And now the big news, Mom. Brace yourself. 4 months ago, Josh enlisted in the Air Force and will soon head to language school in Monterey, California. Well, I think so. What language school? Russian, Linda gasped in shock. It was already beyond her comprehension. Chuckling quietly at her mother's reaction, Stacy remarked, Isn't it wild? Josh is currently stationed at Lackland Air Force Base, waiting for clearance. So Dad asked him to come home and attend a party in his honor. Oh, and Fona started treating him more gently, though she still won't admit she's with Josh. But we girls can tell she's fallen for him too. Fona is not seeing anyone else, and they spend hours on the phone whenever they can. Josh is so smitten, and get this, he plans to finish language school, go to college, earn a degree, and become an officer. Can you believe it, Mom? My always crazy brother, now a military officer. For those who knew him before, this sounds like utter nonsense. Love sure makes you do strange things, doesn't it, Mom? Stacy smiled, gesturing with her slender stiletto heel during their conversation about her brother's future plans. Suddenly, a baritone voice singing The Impossible Dream echoed in the background. Stacy laughed, leapt off the bed, and dashed into the hallway. Mom, you've got to hear this, she exclaimed into the phone, extending it toward the male voice. Simultaneously, female voices joined in with wolf howls and giggles. Then Rachel's laughter rang out. Dad's singing my favorite song, Jan chimed in. Don't quit your day job, Stacy teased. Dad, why don't you take that act on the road? The bus leaves in 10 minutes. Ed's voice, filled with mock indignation, broke through the laughter of the girls. Girls, you're eliminating me. No respect in my own family. I've had it. You're all off my Christmas list. Another burst of laughter followed by a chorus of, We love you, Daddy, and reassurance from the man. They're back on the list. Stacy resumed her conversation, returning to the phone. She continued to giggle. Dad's a riot. He sings when he's happy or nervous, and we always egg him on. It's our little game with him. That's all Linda could manage, unable to say more. Subconsciously, she hoped her family was still suffering without her, but seeing they were thriving, she fell silent. Feeling somewhat dazed, Stacy picked up the thread of conversation. Dad doesn't know he'll be the guest of honor tonight, but he's already a bit nervous. He and Jack McTaggart will play a couple of guitar duets with the band. You know how Dad is with his blues guitar, right? Since he and Jack became buddies, they've been jamming almost every week, strumming their guitars and sharing a few beers. Mom, you've got to hear their jokes about becoming rock stars soon. Ha! They're actually pretty good though. But they jam just for fun. Tonight's their first public gig and I bet it'll be a blast. Just picture Dad in a tuxedo rocking out on stage. Stacy grinned, imagining the scene. Upon hearing this surprising news, Linda was taken aback once more. Stacy, what are you saying? Your dad and John McTaggart are pals? Did I hear that right? John McTaggart? How? Why? Stacy smiled inwardly, with a hint of mischief. She knew her mother held the McTaggart family in high esteem for their wealth and influence. She also recalled her mother's dream of meeting them in person. Now Stacy's dad and Jack McTaggart not only met but practically became best buddies. Stacy also appreciated that the affluent and renowned head of the family insisted that members of the Mercer family address him simply as Jack, rather than the formal Mr. McTaggart in person. Jack turned out to be quite pleasant and played a pivotal role in Ed's writing career's early stages. Yes, Mom, the same John or Jack as his close pals call him, confirmed Stacy. It all began when Dad wrote a couple of articles about surviving and rebuilding life after a traumatic event. Like losing everything when your cheating spouse leaves you for someone else. When a couple of small magazines bought his articles for publication, Dad was over the moon. Then I think Jack read Dad's articles, contacted him, and asked him to deliver a motivational speech at a McTaggart Corporation employee meeting. Dad nearly had a heart attack when he got Jack's offer. He prepared a talk based on his articles, and delivered it at the meeting. The speech was a hit, and he received lots of warm feedback and gratitude, leading Jack to hire him again, this time to speak at the company's annual shareholders meeting. After that success, Dad started getting offers to speak at other meetings from various companies, recommended by the board of directors. Everything fell into place from then on. Dad started writing more and more, his articles got published in bigger and more prestigious magazines. And he eventually decided to quit his job to focus full-time on writing and speaking engagements. Jack kept introducing Dad to important people. They started hanging out more and soon discovered they both loved playing blues and rock guitar. Their shared love for music brought Dad and him even closer, and they've been friends ever since. Stacy paused, allowing her mother to digest everything she'd just heard. It was quite a turn of events in their lives. Your father is a writer now. Seriously, an author, a published writer? Your father, my ex-husband, is in magazines now? A bewildered Linda grappled with the paradoxical idea of her once underachieving ex-husband suddenly finding success. She secretly hoped it didn't pay too well. Meanwhile, sounds of activity drifted up from the first floor of the house. Guests had arrived. There was the muffled chatter of conversation and light laughter. A new, deep male voice stood out amidst the others, along with a much softer female voice. Stacy watched Janice leave Rachel's room and head downstairs, likely to greet the new arrivals as hostess. Suddenly, Stacy recalled a task on tonight's agenda that had slipped her mind. Mom, I'll have to leave soon. Jack and Mona McTaggart are already here, along with photographers for the newspaper's gossip column and the special photo album they produce and sell every year. There's an elaborate photo spread capturing the enchanted moments guests spend at their summer evening affair. Personally, the grandiosity makes me nauseous, but I believe the sales of this album raise significant funds for charity. So in the end, it serves a noble purpose, and we, the participants, bask in the warmth and goodwill there, almost feeling like celestial beings, she snorted. Stacy's voice carried a fair amount of sarcasm as she found the event excessively pretentious, catering unnecessarily to the vanity and narcissism of its attendees. Nevertheless, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride that her father's accomplishments had suddenly elevated their family to a level of social status deserving of respect, especially from her estranged mother. Linda swiftly defended the high society tradition. Oh, Stacy, don't underestimate this. It's a great honor to be featured in this album and to know you were part of a historic event. You and Rachel should be thrilled to be the guests of honor at such a grand gathering. And since you'll be seated at the main table, your photos will grace nearly every page. I've secretly bought one of these albums almost every year, and this year I'll proudly show off a photo of Josh, you, and Rachel and say, look at these special people. They're my children. Just imagine. I'm actually quite envious of you, but at the same time, I'm immensely proud. I'll definitely be ordering several copies of this year's album as soon as they're available. Okay, Mom, Stacy replied absent-mindedly, then recalled something else. Dad was supposed to attend a writing event in New York over Labor Day weekend, and Rachel, Janice, Fona, and I were planning to join him. Maybe then we could see you. I'd really like that, and I'm sure I could convince Rachel to come too, though she's still very angry with you for leaving. Maybe we'll bring Janice along so you two can meet. You'd probably also like to see Dad, just in case, the daughter clarified. Oh, sweetheart, that's a fantastic idea, Linda agreed. Let's consider the options. I really want to see you and Rachel. As for your dad and his girlfriend, I'm not sure it's a good idea. There's been too much pain on both sides. However, I'd love for you to meet Frank. After all, he's your stepfather now. Upon hearing the last statement, Stacy made a gagging gesture with her tongue hanging out, pretending to be disgusted. Well, no, Mom. I still have nightmares about you and your Frankie snuggling up. Blech! So the only way I'd meet him and you is if Dad and Janice are there too. I think that's only fair. Linda wasn't pleased with her daughter's reaction, but tried to conceal her emotions to keep the conversation going. Okay, let's see how things unfold, Stacy. But let's not lose sight of our shared goal to finally reunite. I can't wait to see and hug you and Rachel again, so let's focus on that, honey. By the way, coincidentally, the New York Literary Guild is hosting a Meet the Books Day on Labor Day weekend. And Frank is using his influence to secure tickets for us to attend. I'll push him to get tickets for all of us, the mother assured, enthralled by the upcoming prestigious event. Linda eagerly shared her plans with her daughter. This ball is shaping up to be quite an esteemed affair. Can you imagine, Stacy? Many renowned writers will be there, some signing their books and engaging with readers and fans. Perhaps you'll even get a selfie with one of the famous authors. You should see how excited Frank is. Need I say more? Did you know David Voltz himself promised to attend, and Frank is really keen to meet him. David is an up-and-coming writer, but Frank insists his debut book is sensational and absolutely brilliant. Yes, Mom, I've heard of David Voltz. Actually, I've met him several times. I agree, his work is truly remarkable. I read his book some time ago and found it quite thought-provoking. Have you read his book yourself? Stacy's jab caught Linda off guard, but she chose not to react. No, to be honest, I haven't read it. It's not really my type of reading, but Frank, oh heck, a big fan. Stacy chuckled, almost about to comment on how the book lacked enough pictures for her mom's literary tastes, but she held back. Mom, do you have a hardcover or paperback copy of David's book handy? Linda glanced around and then went into Frank's office. Yes, we have the hardcover book right here on Frank's desk. Why do you ask, dear? Look at the back inside of the dust jacket and tell me what you see. Ah, here's a photo of the author of the book. Oh dear, it's Ed. Oh my goodness, this is a photo of your father that I took about 7 or 8 years ago. Oh Lord, how can this be? It can't be. David Voltz? It's your father, not David Voltz. Please tell me if this is some sort of mistake. Stacy doubled over with laughter, trying not to choke as the irony of the situation sank in. There's no denying it, Mom. Yes, and yes, David Voltz is actually Edward J. Mercer. When Dad decided to pursue writing, he wanted to keep his writing ambitions separate for various reasons. So he created a pseudonym and published his first novel under the name David Voltz. It's quite amusing, Mom. Stacy barely managed to speak into the phone, wiping away tears of laughter. Just think, your new husband's favorite author is your own ex-husband. It's absolutely hilarious. I haven't laughed this hard in ages. They could make a movie about this. Unbelievable, Mom. This is just too funny. Linda just sat there looking devastated and finally said quietly, crap. Stacy already had to go, so ending the conversation, she said, still chuckling, I have to go, Mom. I'll send you my email address and you can send me yours, and we'll agree on our plans for Labor Day weekend. I'm so glad you called, and I really want to see you again. I love you, Mom. Phew, this is still too funny. In some inexpressibly gloomy voice, Linda asked, say hi to your brother and sister for me and give them my number so they can call me when they get a chance. I love you too, Stacy. The eldest daughter turned off the phone and went downstairs, still giggling to herself at the unexpected consequences of the recent turn of events. Preening in front of the large mirror, prepared to take photos for the social onlookers, Stacy knew that tonight she would have no problems with her dazzling smile, but only she would know the reason for her excellent mood. Linda continued to sit in deep thought for a long time, staring blankly at the book lying on the table in front of her until she came to the clear realization that karma is truly a vengeful cow. She didn't have time to completely move away from the conversation with Stacy when Frank almost trotted into the room. Linda, you will never believe what happened. I just received a card from David Voltz. I wrote to him telling him how much I enjoyed his book and how much I was looking forward to seeing him in September. And so, he answered me, and he wrote the message with his own hand. Can you imagine? Wait, I'll read it to you now. Dear Frank, you have no idea how glad I am that you read and liked my first novel. Although you may not know it, it was you who provided a very positive influence on my life and career. I don't know if I can ever thank you enough for this, so I look forward to thanking you in person. You have lifted a huge weight off my shoulders and provided a much-needed spark for my personal growth as a person and a writer, so I am deeply indebted to you. Best wishes, David Volz. Frank, in his ecstatic joy, continued to babble excitedly about how he must have met David once, because his photograph in the book looked a little familiar to him. But he couldn't remember where he had seen the now popular writer. Now her husband couldn't wait to meet him in person, hoping to become a good friend to his new favorite author. All this time of intense joy and bustle around her, Linda continued to become more and more gloomy and depressed as Frank's words sunk deeper and deeper into her mind. Finally, in a creaky voice from the depths of her parched throat, she exhaustedly squeezed out, "Shut up, Frank. Just shut up."
Story 2.
My wife cheated while reconnecting with a childhood friend, so I exposed her secrets to everyone. My wife and I met when we were both in our senior year in college. We started talking based on an interest in the same TV shows and anime, and then we eventually fell in love. To be honest, it felt so right at the time, and I didn't have too many moments where I ever doubted our relationship. There were quite a few stupid fights early on, especially regarding guys she was hanging out with, but I was always reassured. Looking back, I was probably gaslighted, or is it gaslit? But things always ended up resolved. Probably not the only red flag I ignored. Anyway, we dated for 4 years, tied the knot, and had been married for 3 years on top of that, so we're heading into our 30. Since we met in college, we lived our childhoods very far apart. I grew up in the United States, but I found out that before she lived here, her family lived in Ecuador, at least until she was about 12. Once she got here, she grew up in Washington. She would occasionally tell me about her childhood in Ecuador, and for someone like me who has never left the country, these stories were pretty interesting. It was through these stories that I learned about a really close childhood friend of hers called Daniel. From the sound of things, he had one of those innocent juvenile crushes on her, though she claimed she couldn't remember whether she felt the same way about him back then. She leaned towards there being very little emotion of that sort. She and Daniel hadn't been in contact much, though he had sent her a friend request on Facebook 2 or 3 years ago. They did a bit of catching up following the friend request, but soon after, it was nothing more than occasionally reacting to each other's posts on the platform, as far as I know, at least. Now the mess really started when she got a message from Daniel saying that he'd be moving to the United States. He had graduated school, worked a bit in Ecuador, and now he was ready to jump into the US job market. Great for him. The problem was, my wife seemed to be the only person this guy really knew in the US, and he really wanted them to meet up so they could reconnect. And he could also learn the basics of living in this country that was new to him. To be honest, I didn't really think there was much wrong with this. They last saw each other when they were kids. There was little interaction as adults, none of it in person, and both she and Daniel seemed to be happily married. His wife would be coming along with him after all. So, the time finally came around, and Daniel flew over to the United States. He was going to start working in California, but his flight plan was to come straight to Dulles and go by road to Cali. My wife offered to pay for his road trip so it would be less inconvenient for him. In fact, she didn't consult me before she agreed to pay for him. He chose to make the trip to see her, so I'd have preferred if he took the brunt financially, but at the time, I thought I might have been a jerk considering this was a guy from South America about to start a new life. So maybe it was a huge help for all the financial weight not to be on him. I drove my wife to meet him at a public park and noticed that there was no one else with Daniel. I knew he traveled with his wife, so I expected to see her there. After the pleasantries, I asked about his wife, and he said she went straight to California. I felt a little twinge of unease at that, since I had kind of removed any worry from my mind based on the fact that his wife would be around. But it wasn't improbable that she wouldn't want to spend the entire day in Washington, so I let it go. And since they were likely going to spend the whole day reminiscing in Spanish and I really didn't want to be a third wheel, I took off. They'd have the day to themselves. She'd show him the sights of Washington, and I'd come pick them up whenever they were ready to call their day to a close. Again, this was a childhood friend that she hadn't seen in years, so as much as I was a bit jealous that she was spending the whole day with another man, I wasn't too worried about any risk. It didn't seem likely that anything could happen between them so suddenly and without arrangement. It was several hours later when I got a message from my wife saying that it'd be fine if I picked her up at any time from then. She sent me the address, and it was the bar we frequented the most. Again, I felt a little jealous, but it's a great bar to drink at and converse, so it made sense. As long as no one had too much to drink, things would be fine. About 15 minutes after she sent the message, I left the house and made my way to the bar she was at. I got there and saw her and Daniel sitting at the usual spot, laughing intensely. I walked up to them, and while my wife smiled on seeing me, the laughter kind of faded out. The two of them didn't seem to be very eager to leave, but I guess my presence was like a bad omen bringing their great night to a close. My wife said bye to Daniel and hugged him. I shook his hand, and we all left the bar together. My wife ordered an Uber to take him home, and we drove back to our house. "So how was your day with Daniel?" That was the first thing out of my mouth as I took off my coat after entering the house. She seemed very happy to recount everything that happened, and again I felt jealous, but wouldn't you say it makes sense to be happy about reconnecting with someone you hadn't seen for a very long time? I chalked it up to my insecurity and listened to her as she went on and on about how they walked through the park and chatted, how she took him into a museum, how they got a quick bite to eat, and how they ended up at the bar. I had an odd feeling towards the end of her story, though, because she had a lot of details to share about what they talked about in all the other places. But they didn't seem to talk about much beyond the sports game that was on at the bar, at least according to how she recounted the story. I didn't pry, though, because I hate seeming overly suspicious and insecure, and I really had nothing solid to be wary of. The rest of the night went fine, though, and I got over the niggling feeling I had. The next morning, literally seconds before I walked out of the house for work, my wife quickly squeezed in that she might be going to see Daniel. Yeah, at that point, I had a lot more than a niggling feeling. We had a conversation that went something like this: "What? Isn't he supposed to be heading to California today? Do you want to see him before he heads to the bus station or what? He'll push his departure back by a day. Just a day. He'll go tomorrow, but there's so much to talk about, and I don't know the next time I'll see him. When did you find out he was staying an extra day?" We talked about it yesterday at the bar, but nothing was confirmed yet. He let me know he'd made up his mind this morning. I just kind of stood there, dumbfounded, with a sinking feeling in my gut. Something just seemed wrong. Daniel wasn't a bad-looking guy. I'd say I look better, though, if I do say so myself, so I started to wonder whether she felt some kind of spark for him that wasn't there when they were kids. I must have stood there without saying anything for quite some time because she said, "Babe," to catch my attention, and in response to that, all I said was, "Okay." I had to get to work, so I turned to leave right then. She must have felt something was wrong because as I stepped through the doorway, she said, "I have to show up at work, so I won't spend much time with him, baby." I didn't bother replying. Now let's fast forward to when I was at work. Honestly, I was having a pretty hard time concentrating because I had a very unpleasant feeling about my wife and Daniel. To be honest, I struggle with insecurity sometimes, so I had to keep asking myself whether I was overthinking things. I tried to keep my mind under control, but I failed, and I decided to ask to leave work early. My boss loves me, so that wasn't hard, especially since it was such an unusual request for me. I was granted permission, and off I went. I started to feel very crazy at this point, especially because I did something I'm not super proud to recount, but it was worth it. I've always been good at thinking things through, so the first thing I did was to park my car at a shopping mall. After that, I took an Uber to a Hertz place and rented a very basic vehicle. I drove it to the hotel my wife mentioned Daniel was staying at, and I found a place to park that gave me a good view of the hotel's entrance. In case you're confused, I obviously couldn't drive my own car because my wife might have recognized it. Again, I felt crazy and stupid during all of this because I wasn't even sure she was at the hotel. If she was to be believed, they would have taken another day out on the town. My wife would know better than to stay in a hotel room with another man alone, even if it was just to talk, because putting yourself in such situations is a recipe for trust issues. I'm not joking when I say I sat in the car for 4 hours straight. I was hungry, and I needed to pee, But I was scared that any time I took off could be when I'd miss what I was hoping, or really not hoping to see. But almost as soon as it started becoming unbearable, I caught a familiar figure emerging from the hotel. It was my wife and Daniel. I remember trying to make excuses for her in that moment. They were coming out of the hotel, but I had no idea what had happened between them. Maybe she wasn't in his room. They could have been in the lounge, or at the restaurant or bar. But the fact she was there so late in the day made me uneasy since she had told me she wasn't going to spend much time. I was tussling with doubting her and trusting her in that moment. Well, the tussle lasted until I saw a car pull up in front of the entrance. It was an Uber, I assumed. They both walked up to it, and he opened the door for her, and before she ducked into the car, I watched them share a deep kiss. I don't know whether time slowed down or exaggerated my perception, but the kiss went on for about 10 seconds. I still can't remember how I was able to regain clarity of thought briefly, but I managed to take a video of the last 3 seconds of the kiss. Then she hopped in the car, he closed the door, and her car left. I sat right there in the stupid rental car, unable to process any more thoughts. My brain felt frozen. I think I sat there for an additional hour before I went to return the rental. I didn't go back home that night. I told her I had to work late, and I'd stay the night at the office. She sounded disappointed, but she didn't seem worried because this was something I do frequently. I planned to sleep in a hotel, but then something occurred to me. My wife knew I wasn't coming home, and if she wasn't expected at home, she likely wouldn't have cut her night with Daniel short. I was still going to sleep in a hotel, but this time, it would be the exact hotel that Daniel was staying at. I just had a very strong suspicion that she would go back to the hotel to spend the night with him and try to leave in the early hours of the day before I could possibly get back. So, just like that, I went back, taking my car this time, and I booked a room. Fortunately, they weren't fully booked. It was dark already, so she wouldn't find it easy to spot my car, especially where I parked it. I went into the lobby of the hotel and sat in the most inconspicuous location I could find that had a view of the door, though it was a pretty big lounge, so I wasn't exactly hidden. I'd gotten to the hotel just 35 minutes after I'd called her, so I hoped I had gotten there before her, if she was even going to come. Almost as soon as the thought crossed my mind, who do I see walk in? And she was wearing a certain red dress that I had never been too shy to let her know how much I liked. I'll admit that all I wanted to do was get evidence that she was there and confront her with it later. But I think I lost my mind at that moment. I stood up and rushed over to her before she could ascend the stairs, and I tapped her on the shoulder to get her to turn around. The shock on her face was a sight I could never forget. There were a few seconds of absolute silence between us, and I could see her jaw moving like she wanted to say something, but she really had nothing smart to say. "What are you doing here?" That was what I was able to say through clenched teeth, and she could definitely see I was mad. "You're here to see Daniel, aren't you?" Through a ridiculous amount of stuttering, she managed to let me know that yes, she was there to meet with Daniel, but no, she wasn't going to wait for long in his hotel room. They were going to go out so she could take him to some kind of party or event or something. I asked her why I didn't know anything about this supposed party, but she only said it must have slipped her mind. I wasn't planning to go before. I actually remember seeing her hands trembling, but she tried to keep them steady against her body. "But what are you doing here?" "I'll show you," I said, and I brought out my phone and played the very brief clip I had of her and Daniel kissing in front of the hotel. Now, fellas, I've never hit a woman and I never will, but when she said, "You were spying on me?" as her only response to the video, I won't lie, I felt the urge to. And because of that, I only told her, "Don't come home tonight," before I turned to walk out. She tried to grab my arm and say some stupid words to appeal to me. But I was scared of what I could do if she said something really idiotic in her defense, so I left. I went back home, and in the 3 days since then, she hasn't come home. I know she's fine because her sister that lives across town asked me what was wrong. Apparently, my wife was too ashamed to admit to anything, but I didn't tell her anything. So now, what I really need is advice. I need to hit her where it hurts because she can't play me like this and get away with it. I'll be reading your comments, everyone. Edit, you've all given me a lot to read over the last few days, and I'm very grateful to you all. It's been very tough for me trying to figure out what to do through such heavy emotions. But yeah, I've decided to proceed with a divorce as the first step, like almost all of you recommended. I want to take things a step further with my wife, but I'm not quite sure how yet. I also have some plans for Daniel, but I'll keep that under wraps for now. Hopefully I'll have an update for you all in some weeks, and hopefully not longer than that. Marriage. The ultimate trust exercise. It's like a game of Monopoly, except instead of passing go and collecting $200, you're dodging infidelity accusations and collecting emotional baggage. And as for Daniel, well, he's just the icing on the cake, isn't he? A blast from the past who decided to turn your marriage into a garbage dump. Who knew innocent juvenile infatuations could resurface like a bad penny? Now onto the revenge plot. While some might suggest taking the high road, where's the fun in that? Nothing says revenge served cold like a divorce settlement that leaves her wondering if Daniel's charm was worth it. Sounds like it's about time your wife's sister knew exactly who she's related to. Update. Hey everyone! I'm glad to say that the update you've all been waiting for is here, and I'm just as happy to be telling you all about it as you will probably be to read it. The first step for me was the divorce. I've got a friend from college who is now a pretty successful divorce lawyer, and he was the first person I gave a call after getting my mind settled. Papers have been filed. She's been served. And while we haven't come to a solid agreement on anything, we don't have children, and our income isn't too far apart, so it's unlikely that I'll be paying much alimony, if any. I can live with that to be away from her. We don't own a house and don't have any kids yet, so fortunately, we won't have to go to war over those things. I'll leave her with the apartment since the rent was ridiculous, but she loved the view so much. I couldn't care less. Oh, she called me the other day crying and crying, asking whether she could come to the house and talk things over with me. I told her she could say whatever she wanted to say over the phone, but she just kept weeping, talking about how she was all alone, and she just made a mistake and a lot of other nonsense through her tears. I might have folded, but all I needed to do was quickly look back at what she had done, and it was like smelling salts to me, brought me straight back to my right senses. I knew Daniel's name, and I found him online pretty easily. His wife wasn't hard to find after that, and all I had to do was tell her everything I knew about the little detour her husband took on their trip to America. The video I had helped seal the deal. She was mad, but it was easy for me to be there for her because I was in the same boat as her on opposite ends. We've been talking a lot, and she's a very attractive woman. I'm not saying I'm planning to do anything, but it'd certainly be poetic justice for both of us. We'll see how that develops. Anyway, she's going to leave his butt, which is exactly what I wanted. I just hope she doesn't backtrack, considering she came to America dependent on him. For my wife, I had to be a lot more heartless to get at her. First step, I created a group of her closest family members and friends and let them all know, including the sister who she still refused to tell, what had happened. I didn't share the video with them, but I was ready to pull the trigger on that in case anyone chose to doubt me out loud. Next, I didn't have any way to make her lose her job, but I did think I could make the workplace a bit more uncomfortable for her. This part was tough because I didn't want to have to deal with the whole defamation thing, even though it was true. Fortunately, I knew someone who works in the same building as her, though on a different floor, so I chatted him up and let him know about how I had separated from my wife, yada yada yada. I asked him whether he knew anyone on my wife's floor, and he let me know that he did. All I asked of him was to plant a seed in that person's ear, and hopefully the rest would spread like gossip does. I told him I'd owe him lunch if he did me right. You should have seen the smile on my face when my wife called me fuming, asking why I would tell her job about what happened. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. After all, I didn't know anyone at her office. She knew that was true, but she kept saying, "You must have told someone. Somehow, you must have." I could hear her fighting back tears as she shouted at me, but I only enjoyed it as she did. She also screamed about the fact that I told everyone close to her about what she had done, but all I told her was to be thankful I hadn't sent them the video as well. She promised she was going to make the divorce hell for me, but honestly, I'm ready for it. I should have waited till things were finalized before my revenge, but I guess I was too eager to get back at her. Either way, I'm happy being free of her. There's no point sticking around with cheaters. I'd rather be single than be with someone who was unfaithful. And if these are the cards the universe has dealt me, I'll take them. There are better things for me ahead. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you were able to learn something from my story. It wasn't fun to go through, but I'm still young, and I'll try my best to never waste my time on a woman like her again. Nothing quite like the sweet scent of revenge in the morning, right? Divorce papers filed, wife served, and a new chapter of freedom beckoning. Creating a group chat to spill the tea to her nearest and dearest? That's some next-level petty genius right there. And leveraging your inside man at her workplace to sow seeds of discomfort? Well done, OP. Planting a seed of doubt in the fertile soil of workplace gossip? Truly, a stroke of diabolical genius. Why waste time on someone who can't stay faithful when there's a whole world out there waiting for a revenge-savvy bachelor like yourself? Cheers to better things ahead, OP. Has there ever been a time that you sought revenge? Share your stories in the comments below.
Story 3.
This literally occurred this morning. I'm sharing it here in the hope of venting and gaining some perspective because I've been extremely upset all day and unable to process this rationally. My wife is currently 8 months pregnant with our child, and we live next to another married couple in their late 30s. I've never been a fan of the guy next door. I've always found him to be invasive, and his overly friendly demeanor often seems like he's prying and overly clingy. I'm not sure if my feelings about him are influencing my judgment in this situation, or if this incident simply confirms my suspicions. I left for work as usual, but then decided on the way there that I wasn't in the right mindset, so I called off work. I made a pit stop for breakfast and then headed home to surprise my wife. It took me about 40 minutes in total. When I arrived home, I entered through the back door and was greeted by an unexpected sight. My wife and our neighbor sitting on our living room couch. She was facing him, fully clothed, but with her shirt pulled up to expose her very pregnant stomach. He was facing her, using both hands to rub lotion on her stomach. They both froze in the moment, and my wife asked why I was back so soon. She explained that our neighbor had stopped by to borrow a toolbox while she was applying lotion to her skin, and had asked if he could feel the baby, to which she had agreed. I immediately told him to leave before I physically removed him, and he promptly exited. I tried to maintain my composure and talk to my wife to get the whole story. She claimed that our neighbor's wife is infertile, news to me considering he's never stopped complaining about his personal problems, and he simply wanted to feel the baby. That's her version of events, and she's sticking to it. However, I'm not satisfied with this explanation. In my view, there's a significant difference between allowing someone to feel the baby for a brief moment and inviting them into our home to rub lotion on her stomach. If it had been a close friend of ours, I might have understood, but I've never liked this guy, and my wife has never shown any particular closeness to him beyond polite greetings. She's not the type to let just anyone touch her. It's also rather convenient that he showed up so early, right after I left for work, shortly after his own wife had also gone to work. Furthermore, he's never asked to borrow anything from me before, so it strikes me as odd that he urgently needed a toolbox around 9:30 in the morning. I have doubts about my wife's story. This is the first time my trust in her has wavered. Her explanation just doesn't add up. When I mentioned that I might inform his wife about the incident, she strongly discouraged me, suggesting I shouldn't blow it out of proportion. If it was innocent, why should it be blown out of proportion? Even if there's nothing more to it, I'm not comfortable with what I witnessed. I'm not okay with him touching my unborn child in our home without me present. I understand it's her body and her choice, but I'm not okay with this situation. Feeling the baby kick would be one thing, but he was casually sitting on our sofa, applying lotion to her stomach while they engaged in a private conversation. I'm struggling to find a way to convey my disbelief without causing stress that could be harmful to her or our baby. I don't want to start a fight during this stage of her pregnancy, but my mind is racing and I'm unsettled by what transpired. Any advice would be welcome. Update. I'm providing this single update in response to the overwhelming support and numerous requests to do so. I didn't anticipate such a response, and I've seen references to my situation on other subreddits, so I feel compelled to address it. Many of you were correct. Congratulations. After reading through all your responses, talking to friends, and reflecting for a day, my wife maintained her story, apologized for making me uncomfortable, and assured me it wouldn't happen again. Bob, our neighbor, also left a handwritten note in the mailbox, specifically apologizing. However, I still didn't feel at ease, and the consensus was that I should talk to my neighbor's wife, whom we'll call Sally. So, that's exactly what I did. I waited for my neighbor to leave for work, then called my mother-in-law to take my wife out for lunch and a girls' outing. giving her a chance to get away from the house. I left for work as usual, but then called off again and stayed with a friend. Around noon, I received a text from my wife, informing me that she was with her mother-in-law and would be back by dinner time. When I returned home, I went to Sally's door and knocked. Bob decided to inform Sally that I had kicked him out and made a scene, stating that I didn't want either of them to speak to us anymore because I was angry about his assistance to my wife. To my surprise, I discovered that both Sally and Bob had been visiting my house while I was occupied elsewhere for the past few weeks. My wife had approached Sally and Bob, asking if they could help with chores she couldn't manage alone due to her pregnancy. Sometimes Sally assisted with small tasks, or simply spent time there, sometimes both, and at times just Bob. My wife told Sally that I was aware of it and was fine with their help, which is why she was baffled by her husband's false claims of my anger. Sally showed me the text she sent to my wife. She had her number, not mine, seeking clarification about whether she was still welcome over, but my wife hadn't responded. Since I don't interact with Sally and Bob frequently, she assumed her husband was telling the truth. Sally also confessed that she noticed my wife and Bob becoming close friends, attributing it to the pregnancy, and dismissed it as his way of coping with their infertility. I described what I had witnessed to her, including the tool incident, which turned out to be untrue. We both reached the same conclusions. We both shed tears, shared a hug for the first time, and alternated between denying and accepting the situation while trying to calm each other down. We took a walk around the block together and devised a plan. She intended to call Bob at work and inform him that my wife had messaged her, confessing to an affair between the two of them to see how he reacted. I returned to my friend's place and began experiencing severe panic attacks, fearing I had made a terrible mistake, ruined my marriage, and worried that I might be wrong. A little later, I received a call from my wife, yelling at me to find a way to leave work and come home, so I hurried home. Bob had called her and told her what Sally had informed him. She accused me of being crazy and a terrible person, even considering leaving me. I was in the midst of a panic attack, thinking I had destroyed my life over nothing, while also trying to calm her down for the sake of our baby. On impulse, I told her that if she was leaving, I would still request a DNA test. That's when everything changed. Her entire demeanor shifted to pleading, begging, apologizing, hyperventilating, and holding me. She asked me how I had found out while denying that anything had happened. I reassured her and asked if she would talk to me if we went for a drive. She agreed. I drove us to a parking lot and we talked. I told her that if there was any chance of anything happening, she needed to tell me what had transpired because I already knew quite a bit. She confessed that Bob had made advances a few times before she became pregnant. There was uncertainty about the paternity of our baby. Bob had occasionally visited and acted as a dad on rare occasions, just in case it's his. They hadn't been intimate for months. She suggested we could move away, emphasized that the baby was ours no matter what, and claimed that Bob had manipulated her. She admitted lying to Sally to justify Bob's visits for daddy duties. I asked her if she would stay with her mother-in-law for a few days while I calmed down, and she agreed. I took her home, helped her pack, and dropped her off. I've packed up my essential belongings and am staying in a friend's basement. My friend spoke to my wife on my behalf, telling her that if the baby is mine, I'll take responsibility, but if it isn't, it's her concern. In any case, I'll be filing for divorce. My friends took my phone and removed my presence from social media. She has been attempting to reach out to my friends, but they have told her to stay away. I talked to my boss, who has been understanding. The last update I received from Sally was that Bob hadn't returned home and wasn't responding to her calls and texts. I feel like I've lost everything. In less than a week, my life has completely fallen apart. The only thing keeping me going is the slim chance that the baby is mine. I have nothing else. I woke up today feeling disappointed that I woke up at all. I've never felt so isolated, and I haven't come to terms with any of it yet. I'm praying for the first time in my life, hoping to stop feeling this way and find the strength to move forward. Final update. I'm not sure if anyone will recall my initial posts, as they were removed, and I haven't received an explanation despite messaging the mod team. I'm uncertain if this update will be deleted as well. If anyone wishes, they can use removed it to access the posts if they aren't visible on my profile. I continue to receive messages regularly requesting an update, so this will be my final one. In a condensed version of my very lengthy story, a week after my previous update, my soon-to-be ex-wife gave birth to our child, and I was present at the hospital. I am indeed the father. The weeks following my last update were extremely challenging, with drama added by both sides of our families and friends. Fortunately, I've received immense support from the majority of people in my life, as well as from all of you. My wife and I decided to sit down and discuss matters after her discharge, in my friend's basement with my friend nearby in case I needed support. She came over, and we expressed everything we needed to say. I vented and said many hurtful things, some of which I regret. She spent the entire time apologizing and pleading for me to take her back, hoping to give our family a chance to endure everything that transpired. This continued for about an hour, until I realized there was nothing more to be said, and I no longer felt any romantic love for her. She acknowledged that our marriage was over, and we agreed to prioritize our daughter above all else. We planned to work out a custody arrangement amicably and eventually become more active co-parents once our wounds heal. She has the potential to be a great mother, but she failed as a wife. My sole focus now is to get myself in the right mental state to be the best father possible. We also intend to sell our home eventually, but for now, I'm staying in an apartment. Sally is ending her relationship with Bob. He's currently residing with his mother and continues to avoid direct communication with Sally. She mentioned that the last message she received from him conveyed his understanding of his actions, an apology for hurting her, an expression of love, and a willingness to accept a divorce without contesting it. Sally is finding it challenging to cope with everything and lacks a support system. As a result, we are forming a friendship, primarily two individuals who have been hurt leaning on each other for support. She also intends to begin therapy. Just to clarify, I have no intentions of having anything beyond a platonic friendship with Sally. She's a wonderful person, but that's the extent of it. I still haven't fully come to terms with my new role as a parent. Mentally, I had already prepared myself for the possibility that the child might not be mine. I plan to attend parenting classes and spend more time bonding with my daughter during her early years. It's a daunting prospect, but I am genuinely happy. I understand there's a lot of work ahead and more emotional healing to do, but I am in a stable place and I am a father. That's what matters most. Third story. My wife and I have been married for 6 years. We met soon after our previous marriages ended and quickly fell in love. It's been fantastic. We have our disagreements like any couple, but we've had a wonderful life together, and for the first time, I felt genuinely loved. Then, 3 weeks ago, I discovered she cheated on me. Some context. I've been dealing with anxiety and depression. In the last 6 months, I noticed something wasn't right, and at my wife's urging, I sought help from a new doctor to explore different medications. Her daughter also deals with anxiety and depression, so my wife manages a lot. I understand it's tough, but she mentioned that it had become increasingly challenging for her to cope with my depression in recent months. I didn't feel like going out or doing much, and I probably wasn't the most enjoyable person to be around. I admit I didn't put in as much effort as I should have to improve my mental health until it seemed too late. My wife has a group of friends she attends rock concerts with, which isn't my scene, so I'm fine with her going without me. It's her time with friends, and I get some time to myself. I prefer being at home. But one of the guys in her group is the person she cheated on me with. She claimed they had been good friends for 3 years, and only in the month before she cheated did she start flirting with him. She chose to spend a weekend alone by the lake to clear her head, claiming it was tough living in a home with constantly negative vibes. That weekend away was when she cheated. I should have seen it coming. She dislikes being alone, so her idea of a solitary weekend should have been a warning sign. When I found out, my mind was made up. We need a divorce. Collect your things and leave. I want no part of you. For the first couple of days, I was hurt, angry, and resolute about starting afresh. My wife pleaded for me to come back. She said marriages can withstand this. She doesn't understand why she did it, and she wants to reconcile. I wasn't convinced. But as the initial shock faded, I reflected on how these 6 years have been the best. This was unlike her. She was the last person I'd imagined would cheat on me. Until recently, she was an incredibly loving and caring wife. So I reached out, about 5 days after discovering the truth. She came over, and I expressed my wish to work things out. I wanted her to return home to see if we could salvage our relationship, but she said she didn't want to. She explains there's something clearly wrong for her to act this way, something wrong with the marriage and something off in her mind. She mentioned lining up an apartment and planning to move out, uncertain if we can salvage things. So, I ask her if it's because she's still in touch with the friend she had an affair with. She clarified she's not leaving me for him, but she does have feelings for him, making it impossible for her to focus on us as long as those emotions linger. That's where I stand, heartbroken, feeling hit twice. I learned from a mutual friend yesterday that the friend she's been talking to has stopped flirting, reduced communication, and she's disappointed. It seems like a midlife crisis, seeking attention and serotonin while we're apart. I'm approaching 7 weeks since the D-Day, and the pain persists. With the guidance of a friend, I realized I'm codependent on my wife. My happiness relied entirely on her. She was my whole world. When she left, I felt like I had lost everything. Every day, I'm striving to make myself stronger. Acknowledging my codependency issues, I'm actively working on becoming more self-reliant. Currently, I wouldn't be good for anyone, as I'd likely cling to a new partner, setting myself up for more pain. For those aiming to reconcile, it's essential to introspect deeply first. Understand why you truly desire reconciliation. Great memories and a happy marriage are valid reasons to attempt overcoming betrayal, but ensure it's not solely because your spouse was your entire emotional support. We all need to stand independently emotionally. That's my lesson. I'm unsure how my story will conclude. I'm not even entirely certain I still want to reconcile. I've initiated no contact with my wife to focus on what's most important. Me. Update. Approaching 11 weeks post D-Day, I'm about to sit down with my wife and compel her to decide. I don't desire divorce, but she's left me with no alternative. I can't continue living like this. From the start, I sensed she wanted to explore dating and freedom while keeping me as a backup plan. After a conversation where she shared details about her dating life, it became apparent. She deliberately hurt me, making it clear she was pushing me away. The following morning, I realized it's over. I can't have our marriage hanging in uncertainty while she seeks a replacement. To me, this isn't about working things out. She mentioned missing what we had while dating, but I strongly disagree. I can't tolerate this any longer. I wish to end it outright, but my therapist suggests confronting her with a choice. I'll ask her to halt communication with other men and try to mend our marriage, or she's choosing divorce. This approach prevents her from playing the victim, as she has a say in this. I don't want a divorce, but I refuse to live in this manner. She's shown no interest in reconciling over the past few weeks. Instead, she's sought my help for things she could have asked the guy she's dating. I'm furious and deeply hurt. I'd say there's less than a 1% chance she wants to reconcile. I expect a struggle where she avoids mentioning divorce to sidestep being seen as the villain. She'll likely argue that I haven't given her enough time and that I'm pushing too hard for us to reconcile. Nearly 3 months is ample time to decide whether to stay in a marriage. This turmoil began after my wife spent a weekend with another guy. Despite my willingness to reconcile, she chose to live independently. Despite enduring 2 major blows, I hoped for a positive resolution. Not all stories have a happy ending, it seems. I hope the excitement of dating again is worth sacrificing our marriage. Update. After 11 weeks of coping with my WS's indecision, I finally gave her an ultimatum between the guys she was dating during her newfound freedom or our marriage. She chose the guys. Days later, she claims to have second thoughts. After a week of on and off discussions about reconciliation, I grew tired of the back and forth, and once again, asked her to choose between me and the dating life. For the second time in 11 days, she opted for her freedom. I'm fully aware I was foolish to believe she'd genuinely want to fix things. I let my codependency influence me for 3 months, but it's truly over now. I'm restarting the divorce process and removing her from my life. The hardest part for me right now is grappling with the harsh reality of a failed marriage and being rejected by the woman I love, twice. How did you manage to get past the thought of your WS with someone else? She considers this guy her boyfriend, and he'll be at her family Thanksgiving. It's the same family that used to spend Christmas Eve at our home. Now they'll be with him. I'm absolutely certain I'm making the right choice. There's no doubt. but the pain of being betrayed and her essentially choosing this guy over me, it's excruciating. I don't know how to get through this. Yesterday marked the final hearing for our divorce, precisely 5 months from when I discovered her infidelity. As we left the lawyer's office, she hugged me and wished me happiness. I echo that sentiment. We parted ways for the last time, both with tears in our eyes. She was the one person I was certain I'd spend my life with. That didn't happen. So, while this is a new beginning, an opportunity to find someone who will treat me and my daughter as we deserve, it's a somber time. The pain of her actions won't fade quickly. Rebuilding trust will be the most challenging. She took more from me than she realizes. Cheating is the cruelest way to convey not loving someone anymore. I observed John walking into the bar and greeted him with a grin. Despite the early hour and the almost empty bar, I hoped John would join me. It had been a while since we hung out, as John was busy with something in his life and couldn't make time. Worried, I tried calling and emailing, but I couldn't reach John. I even attempted to visit John's home and office, but he was never there. I hoped his issues were resolved, but the anger on his face indicated otherwise. I stood up to shake hands but was suddenly knocked to the ground by a strong punch from John to the jaw. My head hit a nearby table as I fell. I muttered a shocked exclamation and spat out a bloody tooth. John stood over me, ready to hit again. He accused me, saying I knew and that my wife and I were laughing at him, bet that we enjoyed how trusting he was. My swollen jaw and the likely concussion made it hard for me to concentrate. I couldn't make sense of John's words. The only word I could say was, "What?" He continued to strike my ribs and legs. John shouted about my wife and me helping Amanda cheat. Bar patrons intervened, grabbing John and pulling him back. I, stunned and puzzled, looked on. The bartender called the police, and luckily, a patrol car was nearby. The ambulance took longer to arrive. While John was detained, I, helped by strangers, was assessed and placed on a gurney for transport to the emergency room. I lost consciousness before the ambulance even left, drowned out by the siren. To me, it felt like a short, bad dream. When I woke up, I realized I was in a hospital. It wasn't a nightmare. It was real. As I regained consciousness, Emily, my wife, entered with tears. She expressed her apologies and explained that she had left briefly to call my parents. I sat up a little and tried to gather my thoughts when Emily sat down and took my hand. Sleep and medication reduced the swelling, making my words more understandable. I recounted how I didn't know what happened, how I'd never seen him like this before. He said something about Amanda cheating and us causing it. His words made no sense. Emily's tears continued to fall as I spoke. Maybe I heard wrong, but he seemed to think we were making these trips so Amanda could cheat on him. This is crazy. Why would he think of something so crazy? I fell silent, looking at Emily. Lowering her head, she whispered an apology. I didn't understand why she was apologizing. He hit me, thinking we were helping her cheat. It sounded stupid. Why would he think we'd do something so bad? What kind of terrible people could do this to someone they care about? I looked at Emily as she raised her head. Something was off in her behavior. Maybe I was out of my mind, but her actions were suspicious since she was usually vocal about her opinions, especially about relationships with close friends. She might have been shocked because it wasn't what she expected. As I was about to ask her what was going on, the doctor came in and said my jaw was bruised, not broken. If I didn't have a headache, I could leave with Emily tonight. My head hurt, but something was clearly wrong with Emily, so I lied to the doctor that I felt fine to leave. Time passed. Nurses worked diligently with documents, denying me the chance to ask Emily. They were silent on the drive home. As Emily drove, we didn't even turn on music. We were silent the whole way. I needed answers, but by the time I got home, I was exhausted and just wanted to sleep. After changing clothes, I fell asleep. Emily curled up next to me, hugging tightly. After my shower, I joined Emily in the kitchen. Still in pain, but with a clearer head, I saw Emily deep in thought. Finally realizing I was there, she asked, "How are you feeling now?" "Okay, but I have a small Hitachi, and everything hurts. I just need a day of rest, and I'll be fine. I still can't figure out why John went so crazy." I took a sip and continued. "Did Amanda say anything to you? Have you talked to her since yesterday to find out what happened to him? I chatted with her a bit yesterday, and she was as shocked as I was about what he did to you." I looked at my wife while she spoke. Her response seemed measured, but there was something more. She appeared sad, which was unusual given her typically upbeat personality. She seemed reserved. I thought maybe the attack had shaken her more than I initially thought. I reached out, taking her hands in mine. "It's okay, honey. I'm fine. I've come to my senses." Soon, my shirt was wet from her tears. We hugged with the words, "I love you." Holding each other tightly, we both called into work and spent the entire day at home. Something besides physical pain bothered me. None of it made any sense. John's sudden attack, accusing us of helping Amanda cheat. Emily's sudden change to being timid. Her vague answers to basic questions. I wanted to press her about her conversation with Amanda, but Emily was on the verge of tears. I thought now was not the best time for a confrontation. Despite both staying home, we seemed distant. I sat in the backyard, watching the wind move the trees and grass, thinking I needed to understand why John attacked me. We had been friends for a long time, and I had never seen John lose his temper without a good reason. I thought about my wife's words and couldn't recall her ever saying that John's wife hadn't cheated and had only apologized for the attack on me. We needed to hear John's side of the story, and the best way was from John himself. Although there was a risk he might attack again, it seemed like the most direct way to understand what happened. I would then talk with Emily about our roles and what made John think we were betraying him. Emily informed me that she planned to briefly stop by work to pick up her laptop, as she would be home for the week and didn't want to fall behind. After she left, I decided to visit John. On the way, I tried to call him but couldn't reach him. I hoped John was out of prison, so I took a taxi to his house. If we were lucky, we could figure out what caused the mess and get back to normal. Upon reaching John's entrance, my stomach dropped when I saw Emily's car. Instead of ringing the doorbell, I walked to the back until I heard Emily talking to Amanda. Emily was no longer silent. She was furious. John had overheard her talking about setting up a date and having my back, a conversation not meant for him. This explained why he attacked me. According to Emily, John heard her say that she'd cover for her, and Tom and John would be busy, so she could go out without arousing John's suspicions. It seemed John took it to mean that I knew what was going on. Emily claimed she would have warned me if she knew. It wasn't until I was attacked that she realized John knew. He used his phone call to express his hatred towards her, choosing to rot in prison rather than live with her. Emily wanted to sympathize, but it was Amanda who left John. Emily's support for Amanda caused serious problems in her marriage, and things could worsen when I found out. She knew it was wrong, but hoped for a short fling. Instead, Emily's support led to the worst. Now she must deal with the consequences because of Amanda, who couldn't keep her actions in check. I expressed my concerns to Emily about my marriage being in serious trouble once I found out. She tried to reassure me, stating that I never cheated, and if needed, she would tell me that. I couldn't see her, but I could tell from her voice that she closed her eyes and rubbed her forehead as she spoke. Despite Emily's attempt to reassure me, I argued that I had lied to her, helped her scam my best friend, and as a result, he attacked me. I doubted that I could make her believe anything I told her, especially given her role in the situation. Emily insisted that I didn't do anything wrong and that I should know this. Frustrated, I told her that it didn't matter, and I had no idea how to fix the situation. If I didn't have a solution by the time I found out, my marriage would probably end just like hers did. I couldn't believe what a fool I was for helping her. I warned her that if I lost it, I would never talk to her again. Emily, trying to console me, mentioned that I had always been a loving wife, and Tom knew how much I loved him. I sarcastically replied that I was such a loving wife that my support of my promiscuous friend resulted in my husband getting his butt kicked by his best friend. She insisted that I didn't understand the situation, and that it would be years, at best, before I regained trust. I couldn't help but feel like a fool, wondering if Tom would ever trust me again. Having heard enough, I calmly returned to the street. My resilient nature allowed me to remain calm and focus on the task at hand. While waiting for a taxi, I realized I needed to start setting things right. But first, I needed to make sure I had all the facts. It was time to visit a friend. The passed-away sergeant and detectives appeared confused when I expressed my intention to pay bail, but after years of dealing with strange incidents in police work, they simply shrugged. They smirked at John's look when he saw me pull him out and laughed openly when I told John to just shut up until he was told to talk. Confused, John followed me and silently got into the car. After I gave the driver the address, we sat in silence until we arrived at the crime scene. The same bartender was on duty, nervous and obviously afraid of trouble. I quickly calmed him down, asking for a bottle of Glenmorangi's Signet, 2 glasses, and to be left alone. As we moved to a corner booth, I poured a generous portion into both glasses and pushed it towards John. We both drank and exchanged a sarcastic toast to the first drink. I looked at my friend. I explained to John that I didn't know about this setup. I just wanted to hang out and have a good time with him. They used our friendship against him, knowing I would never agree to this, so they started their lousy scheme without my knowledge. John looked at me carefully, able to tell when I was talking nonsense. It was clear from the expression on his face that now I was being honest. Once the initial anger had passed and he had cooled down in prison, John was able to think reasonably about what I told him. He expressed how she tore his heart out, and my wife Emily helped her. I shared my frustration, stating that I gave our marriage everything I had, only for it to be a waste of time because she chose to follow some strange man into bed. I refilled the drinks and simply listened to my friend while John expressed his frustration and anger about his marriage. When the whiskey and verbalization of the event eventually calmed John down, he apologized for the attack. John admitted he probably should have talked to me first, but he couldn't help himself. The revelation that his marriage and our friendship were over made him feel out of control. As much as it hurt that she cheated on him, the thought of me stabbing him in the back was even worse. Cheating was bad enough, but the idea of me laughing at him hurt even more. He sincerely apologized. I grinned, sipping my whiskey. It's okay. I probably deserved it for having an affair with your sister sometime during the Christmas holidays. When I asked how he found out she was cheating, John shook his head. He explained that a few weeks ago, he felt something was wrong in his marriage, so he started to pull away. He eventually concluded that she must be cheating, preparing to hire a private investigator. While he was at work, his phone started showing video and audio from the Ring camera on the front porch. The motion sensor went off while Amanda was picking up an Amazon package. During a phone call, she made an appointment to have closeness with someone and mentioned that I and Emily could help her, just like before. It didn't sound like I didn't know what was going on. It sounded like I was actively participating in the deception. I stared at him, not believing his eyes. 2 marriages had ended because John's wife couldn't close her legs and forgot about the camera, so Emily cheated too. Tom hadn't thought about it, but it made sense that she would do the same thing. She covered for John's wife. Actually, he was almost convinced that Emily didn't cheat. He heard them talking before they picked John up, and that convinced him that she wasn't out for a walk. Considering Emily's fidelity, Tom questioned why John wanted a divorce. Maybe it would be easier to forgive her if she had slept with someone else. The situation was even worse for him. The problem was not betrayal, but trust. Not only had she repeatedly lied to him about her actions and John's wife, but she had used their friendship to cover it up in the most evil way possible and make him an active participant in the deception. He wondered how he could stay married to her if he couldn't trust her anymore and his best friend hated her. He believed that trust could be restored, clarifying that he didn't trust his wife at all. However, he acknowledged that Emily loved him, prompting John to ask if he was sure this was the end. I expressed my belief that trust, cemented by time, was not stronger but weaker. While people may forgive, they never forget. He had no intention of spending the rest of his life hoping that, in years to come, this would be just a faded memory. I asserted that Emily knew what she was doing, and there was nothing she could say to solve the problem. It was time for him to leave and start over. John envied his friend for having an amicable divorce, and they would both remain on good terms. John joked about trying to find a Mexican brothel to get Amanda the right job for her skill set and pay less child support. I laughed, expressing awe at John's ability to see life as it is. It felt like his world was ending, but he knew that in the long run, he would be okay. He went home and talked to Emily, and since she already knew what was going to happen, it would likely be relatively smooth sailing. She cried and begged for counseling, but she understood that he would not be able to come to terms with her behavior. I recognized that it was out of character for her, and she knew it. It was time for him to take a new direction and look at his life with fresh eyes. The chapter in his marriage to Emily was over.
Story 4.
The story of my life isn't one I would have written for myself, but I've come to embrace its twists and turns. There were moments I felt completely lost, as if the world had exposed away every bit of stability I had ever known. These weren't just hardships. They were seismic shifts that shaped who I became. Each time I was on the verge of giving up, someone stepped in, sometimes just in time, to guide me back towards solid ground. But before those rescues came the chaos. My earliest years were a blur of instability, colored by my mother's struggles and my grandmother's fleeting care. When my grandmother passed, I was thrown into a situation far worse than I could have anticipated. Those years in foster care were a series of trials, some I'd rather forget and others that forged a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. By the time I met the people who would ultimately save me, I had already lived lifetimes of hardship. I've been pulled from the depths of life's chaos 3 times. The first 2 times, Gunny Hopkins and his wife, Mrs. Hopkins, were the ones who stepped in to keep me from completely losing my way. The 3rd time was different, though, and this rescue could last a lifetime. I'm David Dare, though most people call me Davy. I spent 12 years in foster care and never met my father. Honestly, I'm not sure my mother even knew who he was. If she did, she never told me or my grandmother. For the first 6 years of my life, my mother struggled with substance misuse, disappearing for days at a time. When she was gone, my grandmother took care of me until her death just before I started 1st grade. After she passed, I went back to my mother, but that didn't last long. Less than 2 months later, I came home from school to find my mother unconscious in bed, a needle still in her arm. I tried waking her up, but I knew from experience that sometimes she just needed rest. So I waited. I ended up waiting for 3 days, surviving on whatever I could scrounge from the fridge and a box of cereal I had to climb up to reach. After missing 3 days of school and still not being able to reach my mother, Mrs. Gallagher, my 1st grade teacher, came by to check on me with her husband, who worked as a gas station attendant. When they knocked, I hesitated to let them in until Mrs. Gallagher assured me everything would be okay. I told her, "Mom's just sleeping," I explained. Mrs. Gallagher went to check on my mom, and after a short time she called for her husband. He confirmed that my mother had passed. They called Children and Youth Services, and I was placed into foster care. Years later, Naomi Schaefer Riley published a book titled How Not to Treat a Child, which critiques the foster care system. The one point I disagree with is that she doesn't emphasize enough how damaging the system can be to the children caught in it. CYS made some half-hearted attempts to find any relatives who might take me in, but I didn't know of any. This was long before genetic testing or online ancestry services became widespread, so I spent a lot of time going through my mother's belongings, hoping to find a name or some kind of contact information. CYS found nothing, and I ended up in long-term foster care, which was deeply flawed. By the time I turned 14, I had lived with 12 different families and attended 9 schools. I wasn't a troublemaker or rebellious, but many of the families I lived with were almost as dysfunctional as my own. Some took me in just for the financial aid they received. I saw bullying, misuse, and neglect in many forms. The worst cases were in homes with both adopted and biological children. There, a clear hierarchy existed, with the biological children always getting the better treatment. Those years of my life were full of turmoil, and I was close to a complete breakdown when Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins stepped in. I first met Gunny Hopkins in gym class when I was in 1st grade. He was an African-American retired Marine sergeant who had started a second career as a high school PE teacher. At the time, he was probably about 40. I'll never forget meeting him. He was about 6'3" tall and weighed almost 240 pounds. If there was any fat on him, it was hard to find. He terrified all the boys at school, especially since, after hours, he ran a dojo in a shopping center near the school. Several people I knew trained with him and said he had martial arts trophies on the walls, even though he didn't compete anymore. No one dared mess with him. Mrs. Hopkins was the school psychologist and was in charge of helping new students. She was about 5'2" and maybe 110 pounds, but she could control Gunny any way she wanted. Later, I found out that they had 3 children, 2 sons who were Marine officers, and a daughter in college studying early childhood education. I also learned that no matter how tough Gunny was, he couldn't handle Mrs. Hopkins when she was upset. When she got wound up, she became a force to be reckoned with. It was also around this time I learned that Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins had become foster parents, After taking in a niece whose parents were obsessed and had lost custody, they successfully raised her, and she went on to marry a Marine sergeant and have 2 children of her own. I entered my last foster home a few weeks before starting high school. This family wasn't ideal. The father was an alcoholic, quick-tempered, and always on edge. 2 adopted children had just left, and they depended on the monthly foster care income to get by. With the alcohol, the short fuse, and the financial strain, I expected trouble. And it came about 2 weeks after I started high school. Because of my history with unstable foster families, I was far behind academically. On my first high school exam, I scored like a 5th grader in reading and a 4th grader in math. This meant I would meet Mrs. Hopkins soon after. The meeting was meant to create an individualized learning plan to bring me up to grade level, but it ended up being far more complicated than I expected. The morning of my meeting with Mrs. Hopkins, my adoptive father lost his temper with me. He couldn't find his wallet and accused me of taking it. When I couldn't produce it, he beat me, leaving bruises from my shoulders to my waist, a broken lower lip, and a black eye. I somehow managed to escape and went to school, thinking the day would be normal. I either forgot about the meeting with Mrs. Hopkins or wasn't aware of it. When the teacher told me to go to the office instead of my first class, I walked down the hall and entered her office. The next 30 minutes changed my life forever. By then, I'd gone through enough new student orientations to predict exactly how the conversation would go. As a foster child at a new school, I was used to brief interviews and quick labeling as hopeless. I didn't expect Mrs. Hopkins to actually care about me. I sat down in the chair, turning it slightly to hide the side of my face where my adoptive father had hit me. She began the conversation by asking me to look at her. "What happened to you?" she gasped. I knew how important it was to hide the truth about an adoptive family's problems, so I said, "I fell." "That's nonsense," she replied. "These injuries aren't from a fall. Don't lie to me. If you don't tell me who did this, I'll call the police." I hesitated. She stared at me, then picked up the phone and dialed 911, preparing to make the call. My adoptive father thought I stole his wallet. He was drunk and lost his temper, I finally blurted out. "Did he hit you anywhere else?" "He hit me on the back. It hurts a lot." "Get up and turn around." I followed her instructions. "Pick up your shirt." I lifted my t-shirt to my shoulders. "Good God, how often does he do this to you?" "This is the first time," I said. "I've only been there a couple of weeks." "Sit down," she ordered. "I need to make some calls." To my surprise, her first call wasn't to the director, the police, or CYS. She called her husband, George. "You need to come to my office right now," she said. That was my first hint of how much influence she had over Gunny Hopkins. He showed up just moments later. She explained what she had seen and then asked, "What are we going to do about it?" Gunny wasn't a fool. He knew his wife well and could tell she had a plan. "What do you want?" he asked, already understanding what was coming next. "This child needs a new foster family today," she said firmly. "We're qualified, and we have 3 bedrooms available. If you don't mind, I'll call CYS and ask them to move him today." Gunny nodded silently and stood behind me as Mrs. Hopkins called CYS. The conversation was intense. I had never seen someone so small exude so much power. Mrs. Hopkins didn't ask the CYS employees what should be done. She told them what had to be done, and she demanded they act immediately. I had never witnessed such prompt action from CYS before, and I couldn't believe it was happening. But to my amazement, it was. When the call ended, she turned to her husband and said, "We need to take the boys' clothes and belongings from that house. We'll go after school." She looked at me and said, "Meet me here after your last class. We'll get your things." Then turning back to her husband, she added, "George, take one of your cop buddies from the dojo with you. We'll need him to make sure everything goes smoothly." I glanced at Gunny and couldn't imagine my new adoptive father causing any trouble. But he remained silent, not wanting to jeopardize what Mrs. Hopkins was arranging. I told myself, if she pulls this off, my life will change for the better. Don't mess it up by saying anything. Mrs. Hopkins sent me back to class, telling me we'd meet later to go over my education plan. The rest of the day went as usual. A few people commented on my facial injuries, but otherwise, it was a regular school day. When the final bell rang, I went to my locker, grabbed my things, and headed to Mrs. Hopkins' office, just as she'd instructed. Gunny and a big cop from the dojo were already there waiting for me. The move went off without a hitch. The intimidation of having 2 strong men with me was enough to keep my adoptive father from objecting. I packed up my things, which were few, and loaded them into Gunny's car. He drove me to his house, helped me unload, and set me up in an empty bedroom. I didn't know it then, but the next 4 years would completely transform my life. Living with Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins was radically different from any other foster home I'd been in. They were the first people who truly cared for me since my grandmother. From day one, they made it clear I was expected to be organized, work hard, and stay disciplined. Mrs. Hopkins spent her evenings helping me get my grades up. By the time I turned 18, I was taking college prep courses and doing well. I never had the highest GPA, but I could hold my own in every class. A's and B's were the standard, and anything lower meant extra study hours. Gunny put me through a tough physical training program. Every morning, he had me up at 5:30 for a 5-mile run. He also created a demanding martial arts routine for me, mixing in strength and flexibility exercises. By the time I graduated high school, I was 5'8", weighed 160 pounds, and was in the best shape of anyone I knew, except for Gunny, of course. Shortly before graduation, I turned 18, which meant I was officially out of the foster care system. I worked part-time at a martial arts studio, teaching elementary school kids. After the graduation party, Gunny H. pulled me aside and asked, "What are your plans for the future?" I answered, "I want to become a Marine." He asked if I was sure, considering the intensity of the fighting in the Middle East at the time. I told him I was certain. Gunny and Mrs. H. took me to the Marine Corps recruiter's office, and I signed up. I had just a month left before heading to Parris Island for boot camp. During that month, Gunny pushed me through an even more intense training program than I had already endured, making sure I wouldn't embarrass him in front of his fellow drill instructors at Parris Island. I would never have said it to the instructors, but after 4 years of living with the Hopkins and training with Gunny, Parris Island almost felt like a break. I graduated with honors and carried the company flag during the graduation parade. Gunny and Mrs. H. were watching from the podium, and by then, I considered them my parents. I was proud to show them how well they had raised me. When I enlisted, I planned to make a career in the Marines, but the enemies had other ideas with their RPGs. My first tour was nearing its end, and I had been promoted to sergeant. I was a security squad leader responsible for protecting our battalion commander during a meeting with a local village chief about a water purification project. On the way back to base, the convoy was ambushed. My squad was in the lead vehicle, with the battalion commander and his staff in the middle, and another squad covering the rear. Enemies must have been watching because they hit the middle car with an RPG, not mine. It immediately caught fire. I jumped out, set up a perimeter, and ordered my squad to return fire. While the battle raged, I ran to the burning vehicle and started pulling out the wounded. The first person I reached was the battalion commander. I pulled out 2 of his men and was about to go back for another when the fuel tanks exploded. The blast threw me into a low wall, knocking me unconscious, breaking several ribs and shattering both bones in my lower right leg. When I came to, I was on an ambulance plane to a hospital in Germany. After my leg healed, the Marines awarded me the Navy Cross, a Purple Heart, and a set of plates and pins to hold my leg together. They gave me a medical discharge with a 40% disability rating and paid for my return to my home, Gunny and Mrs. H's house. Back home, Mrs. H asked what I planned to do with my life. I was 22, trained as a marksman, able to teach martial arts, but I had no real skills for the job market. To her surprise, I told her I wanted to go to college and become a high school history teacher. Gunny had made me put a large portion of my pay into a college fund, so between that, the GI Bill, and a disability pension, college was within reach. An hour's drive from the Hopkins house was a good state college with a strong history program and a solid education department. Mrs. H helped me apply. Since I was 22 and had lived on my own for 4 years, I rented a small apartment 15 minutes from campus. Instead of living in a dorm with a bunch of younger students, I decided to double major in history and education, skipping the required freshman courses. One of these was a biology class with a weekly 3-hour lab. Since I didn't live in a dorm, wasn't involved in Greek life, and didn't play sports, I didn't know anyone in the biology class. The teacher told us to pair up with lab partners. Since I wasn't a typical 18-year-old student, no one was interested in partnering with me. When the teacher asked who didn't have a partner, only one hand went up. It was a woman sitting a few rows ahead of me. The teacher told us to team up, exchange contact info, and leave class. I walked down the aisle, introduced myself, and said, "Hello, I'm Davy Dare." She just stared at me, so I continued. "If we're going to be lab partners, we need to exchange information. I'll give you my name and number if you give me yours." She just kept staring. "Miss, we need to do this," I said. "Please, I don't bite, and I promise not to tell anyone." Finally, she spoke. "My name is Vera McDonald. My phone number is..." And she gave me her email. I did the same, then said, "I'll see you in the lab," and headed to my next class. Vera turned out to be a strange person. She had the thickest walls around her I'd ever seen. Trying to get to know her was like chiseling granite with a plastic spoon. We spent almost the entire semester together, and she never revealed a single thing about herself. Despite spending 3 hours a week together in the lab, I couldn't break through her walls, and eventually, I gave up. Then, just before Thanksgiving break, I was talking to a guy in the nearby lab when Vera walked in on us. He asked, "What are you doing over the break?" "I'll be mostly in my apartment preparing for next semester," I said. "Maybe I'll go to my foster parents for Thanksgiving. They live about an hour away, and I haven't seen them since school started." Vera paused suddenly when I mentioned my adoptive parents. She turned to me and asked, "Are you also adopted?" In that moment, everything clicked. I knew how tough foster care had been for me, and I was lucky to have ended up with the Hopkins family. I had seen firsthand how difficult it could be for girls in the system, especially those who were attractive. Vera did her best to hide it with the loose clothes she wore, but I could tell she was a pretty girl. If it weren't for the walls she'd built around herself, I would have already asked her out. Since this was the first time I'd seen even the smallest crack in her armor, I tread carefully. I was in foster care from the age of 6 to 18. I moved through 13 foster homes, and I spent the last 4 years in one. I consider Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins my parents, even though they never formally adopted me. Vera looked at me thoughtfully and said, "I ended up in foster care when I was 2. My dad disappeared, and my mom died of cancer. I had no relatives who could take me in. It wasn't an easy experience. I bounced around from home to home. I was lucky to get out of the system without ending up in jail. I had teachers who helped me and a good social worker. They helped me get a scholarship, and now I'm here studying accounting. I'm planning to find a job that offers as much financial security as I can get with this degree. Accountants are always in demand, so I shouldn't have trouble finding work." "Sounds like a good plan," I said. "I'm focusing on history and education. Gunny H is a teacher, and Mrs. H is a guidance counselor. They pulled me out of a bad foster home and helped me turn my life around. After high school, I joined the Marines for 4 years. So now, I'm just starting college as a freshman." We kept talking as we finished our lab work. When we were done, I asked, "Do you want to grab something to eat? I'm starving. My budget doesn't really allow me to eat anywhere except the cafeteria." "All right, on me," I said. "No pressure. Let me treat you. Like one foster kid to another. I've got the funds, and you can pay me back when you're able." With that, Vera became more than just a lab partner to me. I spent the rest of the semester trying to get her to open up. We didn't go on dates, but we became study buddies, spending a lot of time in the library together. I'd learned to cook from Mrs. H, so I invited Vera over for dinner at least twice a week. We attended some college sports events together, and I even took her out for a nice dinner one night. Throughout all this, I never touched her, except when helping her with her coat. Due to the Hopkins schedule, I didn't have much time for dating. In high school, I had a few short flings with people in the Marines, but nothing serious. As a result, I didn't really have much in the way of relationship skills. It was clear that Vera didn't either. Though she'd opened up a bit, there was still a barrier between us that kept me from really getting to know her. I saw that she was driven by the need to feel secure, financially, physically, and emotionally. She wasn't about to let anyone in who might threaten that security. Getting her to the point where we could have a real relationship wasn't easy, but because I understood where she was coming from, I kept trying. Over time, I realized I was falling in love with her. As strange as it might sound, the Christmas holidays changed everything for us, shifting us from friends to something more. The college shut down for 3 weeks, starting the week before Christmas and ending after New Year's. I hadn't even considered what Vera would do for the holidays until she showed up at my door with a trash bag full of her things. "Davy," she said, "can I stay with you over the holidays? The dorm's closing tonight and I can't afford a hotel." I felt like an idiot. I should have offered to let her stay with me. "Of course," I replied. "I'll put clean sheets on the bed. You can sleep there. I'll take the couch. I've done that plenty of times when I've fallen asleep in front of the TV. I'll get you towels and a washcloth, but I won't kick you out of your own bed. We can share it. I trust you won't take advantage of me. After all, we're both adopted kids. We've probably shared a bed with other people before." Vera was right, though it had been a long time since I shared a bed with anyone other than someone who was easy to get with. And none of those girls had been around for almost a year, ever since I recovered from my injuries and started college. But if she was ready, then I was too. Who knows, I thought. Maybe we can be more than just friends. I helped her bring her things into my room, cleared out space in the closet and a drawer for her clothes, and invited her into my world. The first night was a bit awkward. I was used to sprawling out on the bed, but that didn't work with Vera there. I didn't have pajamas and usually slept in boxers and a t-shirt, but that felt a little too casual, so I threw on some sweatpants over my boxers before going to bed. Vera seemed to trust me as she emerged from the bathroom in a t-shirt and small shorts, with no underwear beneath. I could feel my excitement rising before she even lay down next to me. I tried to be respectful. I moved to the edge of the bed, facing away from her, but somehow by morning I had turned around, spooning her with my arms wrapped around her, my hand resting on her chest. When I woke up, I was clearly aroused, and Vera noticed. She'd been awake for a while. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to be inappropriate." Vera laughed. "It's fine. I actually enjoy the closeness. I don't think I've ever just cuddled with someone before. I could get used to this." She rolled over, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed me, breath and all. I wasn't ready for it, but I didn't pull away. Without asking, she sat up, removed her t-shirt and threw it aside, then climbed back on top of me, kissing me again, more intensely this time. I was tempted, but at the last moment I pulled away. "Vera, you don't have to do this," I said. "I'm your friend, and I don't want you to feel like you're paying me back for letting you stay here. I'm not going to do this unless we're both on the same page about a serious relationship. I care about you too much to just let it be a fling." From my time in foster care, I knew how easy it was for kids to see sex as just a transaction, something to get what you want or say thank you. But being with Gunny and Mrs. H had shown me what real love looked like. I wanted that with Vera, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less. I could tell that no one had ever refused Vera before, and I had no idea how long she'd been in intimate relationships. But I was probably the only real friend she had at college. She'd let me in because we shared the experience of being adopted. Vera studied me for a long moment before speaking. "Davy, sometimes you're too nice. I'm offering you this, and you're turning it down. Are you serious? It's not easy for me to do this, but I really like you. I might even be in love with you. I fantasize about being with you. But unless you feel the same, it's not happening. If I told you I was in love with you, would that change things? Only if I believe you're being honest, not just trying to make me feel good," I replied. "You're impossible," she said, getting out of bed and putting her t-shirt back on before heading to the bathroom. The rest of the day was a little awkward between us. That night, instead of a t-shirt and shorts, Vera wore a tracksuit to bed. There was still nothing underneath, but I sensed she was trying to communicate something. The next morning, I went for a run and called Mrs. H afterward. "Hi, Mrs. H, are we still on for Christmas dinner?" "Of course, Davy. Why would you ask?" "Well, I know it's last minute, but would it be okay if I brought someone else? My biology partner, Vera, is a foster child and has nowhere to go for the holidays. She'll be staying with me because the dorms are closed, and I didn't want her to be alone. The more, the merrier. Bring her along. We'll make sure she has a great time." "Thank you, Mrs. H. Is there anything we can bring?" "Just yourselves. See you then." Later, I picked up pizza and stopped at a jewelry store on the way home. I bought Vera a small necklace with a tiny pendant. Since she would be joining the Hopkins family for Christmas, I wanted her to have a gift to open. I didn't realize at the time, but that necklace would be the first Christmas gift Vera ever received that wasn't from a foster care agency or charity. It was that gift that shifted our relationship from friendship to something more. When I gave it to her, she opened it and immediately burst into tears. Then, in front of everyone, she jumped onto my lap and kissed me like she'd never kissed me before. Later that night, she pulled me into the bedroom and told me she wanted us to be in a real relationship. It took me a year and a half to fully understand our relationship, but for Vera, I'm not sure. We quickly learned that good closeness comes from connection, not just physical desire. Vera never went back to the dorm. When it reopened, we moved all her things into my apartment and started living together. Gunny and Mrs. H had some concerns about how fast things moved, but they accepted Vera into the family and supported us. The next 3.5 years went by fast. Vera excelled in her accounting program, graduated at the top of her class, and landed a job with a top firm in Philadelphia. I found a teaching position at a suburban high school, and we got married in a small ceremony with Gunny and Mrs. H as our attendants. At the reception, Gunny handed me a card with a check for all the support payments they had received for me, which we used to buy a small house near the SEPTA rail line so Vera could commute easily. Despite her long work hours and travel, we were incredibly happy. Vera was finally settled, confident in her career and our relationship. About 4.5 years into our marriage, Vera's firm was hired by the U.S. government to audit a defense contractor accused of massive billing fraud. Vera's team worked on the project for weeks, traveling to the Midwest to investigate. Before each trip, She gave me a passionate night of lovemaking, and the same when she returned. We kept in touch constantly, and although it wasn't perfect, Vera loved working on such an important case. It could fast-track her career. The whistleblower, Richard Wilson, was an accountant who discovered fraudulent billing by a fake subcontractor, eventually tracing it to a corporation owned by defense contractor executives. After reporting the fraud, Richard filed a lawsuit, and things got heated. Vera spent time with Richard on each trip, reviewing the bills and payments. If the fraud was proven, Richard stood to gain a huge payout. At the time, I didn't know that Richard had developed an interest in Vera, and when she saw the potential financial security his investigation could offer, she started thinking about a future with him. Richard made many enemies with his investigation. After 3 failed attempts on his life, the feds placed him in protective custody. He agreed to it, but only on the condition that Vera join him in the witness protection program. It wasn't until years later that I learned Vera's true reasons for agreeing to leave with Richard. It wasn't just the money, but the safety and protection offered by the U.S. Marshals. Her childhood in foster care had left her insecure, and she saw this as an opportunity to escape the life we had together. The morning Vera disappeared started like any other. The night before, we had an intense, passionate night of lovemaking, perhaps more fervent than usual, since we had discussed starting a family, and she had stopped taking birth control pills. I thought it was just her trying to get pregnant before the trip. She left for work the next morning, and that was the last time I saw or heard from her. Later, security footage showed her leaving her office, as if heading to the airport and getting into a black SUV with temporary plates. When I didn't hear from her for days, I grew worried. Calls went unanswered, emails unopened, and texts went ignored. Something felt wrong. I called Vera's office to find out what happened, and they told me she was on vacation. That didn't make sense. She'd been heading to the Midwest for work. I asked if they'd heard from her, but they hadn't. In a panic, I reported her missing, and at first, the police weren't sure there was cause for concern. They asked about any arguments or lovers, suggesting she might have lost her phone or been too busy to check in. When it became clear that her phone was off, her laptop was untraceable, and her cards weren't being used, the police started taking it more seriously. They reviewed surveillance footage showing her leaving the office and getting into a black SUV with fake plates. Soon, they were conducting a full investigation. After hours of questioning and a search of our home, they found no clues. It was as if Vera had vanished. I never believed Vera would leave me, especially since she had shown me love in her own way. The only thing she took was a necklace I gave her for Christmas, something she never took off. As the days passed with no news, I turned to drinking to cope with the pain. I took a leave of absence from work and spent the summer lost in my grief. By July, I hadn't spoken to the Hopkinses in weeks, and Mrs. H grew concerned. She sent Gunny H to check on me. When he arrived, I was drunk and passed out on the couch. Gunny was furious, something I had never seen before. He dragged me to the shower and called Mrs. H for help. She agreed to take me in, and Gunny brought me to their house. He insisted that I pull myself together and promised to help me get back on track. The next morning, he woke me at 5:30 a.m. and pushed me through a grueling workout that left me exhausted but sober. That set the tone for the summer. By the time school started, I was in better shape and my head was clearer. Mrs. H arranged for counseling, and by Christmas I had regained some stability, though the emptiness from Vera's disappearance never fully left. Under Pennsylvania law, I couldn't declare Vera dead until she'd been missing for 7 years. Luckily, her careful financial planning meant I was financially stable, though I couldn't access her retirement funds or sell our house without her. I managed, working part-time as a trainer in addition to teaching, but the hole she left behind never healed. One warm June day, over 5 years after Vera disappeared, I answered the doorbell to find 2 people in business attire, one holding an accordion folder. They introduced themselves as Deputy U.S. Marshal Simpson and Wallach. When they asked if I was Davy Dare, Vera's husband, my heart sank. Had they finally found her, or worse, her remains? I invited them in, and they started explaining something I couldn't grasp. Wallach spoke first. "Mr. Dare, we owe you a huge apology. 5 years ago, the Marshal Service made a mistake. We're here to make it right." Confused, I listened as she continued. 5 years ago, we put Richard Wilson, the informant in the case your wife was working on, into the witness protection program. He exposed a massive defense fraud. Vera was part of the audit team. Apparently, she and Wilson started a relationship, and he convinced her to join the program with him. Before she left, she made arrangements to ensure everything was taken care of. your divorce, the transfer of all assets, and a letter to you. All of this was meant to be delivered once they were safely settled. Anger hit me hard. You're telling me my wife ran off with some guy she met during an audit? And you knew about this and didn't report it? I've been mourning her for 5 years, and you've been sitting on this. I can't believe this. Wallach looked remorseful. We're deeply sorry. This folder was supposed to reach you long ago. We only found it when we revisited our records after Mr. Wilson and your wife were liquidated. Liquidated? I echoed, stunned. Yes, they were living in Portland when Mr. Wilson was eliminated in a home invasion. Your wife was seriously injured and fell into a coma. She survived for 35 days after his death before passing. Their second child, a son, and your daughter were unharmed and are in our care. I was in shock. What do you mean, daughter? We never had children. Yes, you did. Vera was pregnant when she entered witness protection. Your daughter is around 4.5, and there's a son, too. Vera had a DNA test done after your daughter was born, and it confirmed that the child is yours. She left instructions for you to be their guardian if anything happened to her and Richard. She even set up a trust for the kids, worth over $100 million with you as the trustee. I was reeling. How do you know all this? Vera trusted you completely. She had enough faith in your relationship to make you the children's guardian. She also left you her $5 million estate, including a necklace she wore constantly. She wanted you to give it to Violet as a wedding gift when she marries. The weight of everything hit me all at once. There's something else you need to know. Although we relocated Richard and Vera with new identities as husband and wife, your marriage wasn't legally dissolved because you never filed for divorce or declared her dead. Legally, you're still her husband. At least, you were until she passed a few days ago. This means we can hand Violet over to you right away. But there's more regarding Samuel. We're creating a new birth certificate for him. Once we get it, we can transfer both children to you without you having to go through the entire adoption process. We'll replace Mr. Wilson's name on the birth certificates with yours and complete the transfer. What do you think? What do you want me to say? Are you kidding me? Excuse my language. You show up at my door unannounced and tell me my missing wife spent 5 years with some guy under a false identity and has just died? That I have a daughter I've never met who also has a half-brother? That these kids are incredibly wealthy and you want me to take custody? Do you hear yourselves? Some people in this room are out of their minds, and I don't think one of them is me. As embarrassing as it is to admit, it's all true. We'd like to set up an appointment to officially release the children to you and connect you with a probate law firm. We ask that you keep this quiet until everything is finalized. We know we made huge mistakes, and we're deeply embarrassed. Heads will roll for this, but right now the priority is the children. So, are you in or not? As far as we can tell, Vera and Richard had no other relatives. If you don't take them, they'll end up in foster care. It was a low blow. I suspected both marshals knew I'd been adopted and were playing that card. Do what we ask, or 2 young children would be placed in a system I hated. Once they played that card, I had no choice. I agree. When can I meet the children? The marshals left a folder with documents Vera had asked them to prepare when she disappeared. I put it on my office table, figuring it could sit there for a few more days. It had already been 5 years. After the meeting, I called Hopkins. Without going into details, I told them that federal law enforcement had contacted me, that Vera was dead, and that she had 2 children I now had to raise. I'll pass the details on to Funny and Mrs. H. They didn't question my sanity. They just jumped into action, helping me plan for my new role as a single dad. 2 days later, at a federal courthouse in Philadelphia, Violet and Samuel were officially handed over to me with new birth certificates naming me as their father. Now, I was their father. Completely unprepared, confused, sad, and angry, but still a father. Samuel, being younger, warmed up to me quickly. It took Violet a few more weeks, but by the time school started in the fall, both were calling me Dad. I enrolled them in a daycare near school that most teachers used. Hopkins pulled strings to find me a pediatrician, reliable babysitters, and other resources for a new dad. I think they saw Violet and Samuel as more grandchildren and me as a son, if not officially adopted. The folder sat on my desk for a month before I finally opened it. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I opened it. Inside were the documents the marshals had mentioned: Vera's engagement and wedding rings, 10 copies of her death certificate, and the necklace I had given her that first Christmas together. After Vera's death, the marshals had retrieved her personal belongings from the hospital and included them in the packet they gave me. I stared at the envelope containing Vera's last letter for a long time before opening it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know her final thoughts. But eventually, I opened it and began to read. Dear Davy, by the time you read this, I'll already be gone. I'm sorry for doing this to you, but I tried to make my disappearance as simple as possible. Enclosed are all the documents you need to erase me from your life and move on. I know this will hurt you, and for that, I can only offer my deepest regrets. You loved me unconditionally, and I'll always cherish that. I wish I could love you the same, but I know myself well enough to admit I've never truly loved anyone. I don't think I even have the capacity for it. After all those years in foster care, I know no one ever truly loved me until I met you. Maybe with the exception of my mother, though I remember nothing of her. You are much stronger than I am because you survived the system and still had the ability to love, but not me. Maybe it's because Gunny and Mrs. H were there for you. Or maybe it's because you're the best man I've ever known. By leaving with Richard, I've gained physical and financial security that we could never have had together. As a former foster child, I'm sure you'll understand. We'll be protected and have money beyond anything you and I could have built. I don't like Richard, and I think he knows it. But he loves me and believes that over time, I can learn to love him, especially if we have children together as we plan. So Davy, be angry. Hate me if you must. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope, when you reflect on your own painful experience in foster care, you'll understand why I made this choice. Please cut me out of your life and move on. Forget me. If you need to mourn, I'll understand, but if not, I get it. There's a woman out there who can love you the way you loved me, and I hope you find her. I hope she gives you a full life, a home full of children and grandchildren. I couldn't give you that. Farewell, my dear Davy. Be healthy, live long, and may it be fulfilling. After reading the letter, I sat at the table for a long time, quietly crying. The paradox was overwhelming. Vera had run away to what she thought would be safety, only for a random act of violence to take her life. My tears weren't just from loss. They were for the fact that a broken system had ruined the woman I loved, a woman whose childhood had exposed her of the ability to truly love anyone. Her death meant that she would never experience that kind of love. I put the letter in the safe and went to bed. I'll never understand why anyone would choose to be a single parent. The good news was that by the time Violet and Samuel came into my life, they no longer woke up every 2 hours. But by the end of the day, I was still exhausted after teaching all day and caring for them at night. Eventually, I used the money Vera had left me to hire a full-time housekeeper nanny, Maria, a lovely 50-year-old Mexican immigrant who immediately began teaching the kids Spanish and showering them with affection, almost like a grandmother. By the time the kids had lived with me for a year, we had become a family. The summer after the Marshalls' visit, I took them and Maria to Ocean City, New Jersey for 2 weeks. It gave Maria a break while the kids played at the beach. We all had a great time and were sad when the vacation ended. When Vera and I bought the house, my closest neighbors were over 70. Early that summer, they told me they were moving to Texas to be near their daughter and grandchildren. Their house sold quickly, and the deal closed while we were away. I hadn't yet met the new neighbors when Violet came in from the backyard with a request. Dad, can Teddy play in our playtown? Who's Teddy? New boy next door. Did his mom or dad say he could come over? I didn't see them. Okay, let's go ask. It's a good chance to meet the new neighbors. So we went next door. I rang the doorbell, and after a short wait, an attractive 30-year-old brunette answered, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a matching t-shirt. How can I help you? She asked. Hi, I'm David from next door. We just got back from the shore. Violet is my daughter, and I have a son, Samuel. They were playing outside, and your son wanted to join them. I just wanted to check with you first. Hi, I'm Carol Schick. We moved here a week ago. You caught me in the middle of painting Teddy's room. Are you sure it's okay for him to play with your kids? Of course, no problem. We'll keep him entertained while you get your painting done. Let me give you my number, and you can call me whenever you want him to come home, or just shout from the backyard. She thanked me and went inside to tell Teddy he could join Violet and Samuel. The kids hit it off like they'd known each other forever. Carol must have lost track of time, because by dinner I still hadn't heard from her. Violet and Samuel wanted Teddy to eat with us, so I went next door again. Carol answered the door, looking even more paint-splattered than before. Hi again, she said. I was going to feed my kids, and they want Teddy to join us for dinner. If that's okay, I'll feed them all, and you're welcome to join us too. Can you give me 20 minutes? I'll take a quick shower and change out of these paint-covered clothes. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and Carol appeared in clean jeans and a man's shirt, sleeves rolled up, holding a bottle of red wine. Come on in, I said. We're having spaghetti and meatballs. I hope that's okay. I made a salad to go with it, and garlic bread's in the oven. "This is amazing," Carol said. "Teddy loves spaghetti, though we might have to hose him down afterward. I love pasta, too." "Is your husband here?" I asked. I didn't feel like explaining Vera's entire story to a woman I had just met, so I simply said, "I'm a widower. My wife passed away a little over a year ago." "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I know how much it hurts." My husband was a helicopter pilot in Middle East. He was liquidated in action about 2 years ago. "I'm sorry," I said. "I spent 2 tours in the Middle East as a Marine and lost several friends there. Losing someone you love is always painful, but it felt different now that I knew Carol was also a widow. She was attractive, maybe a year or 2 younger than me, with an appealing face and a nice body. She had a few extra pounds, but they were mostly around her hips and chest, giving her an hourglass figure I found very attractive. Carol and I ended up talking for nearly 2 hours. After the kids ate, we washed dishes together, then sat around the kitchen table with a glass of wine, getting to know each other better. Carol works as a librarian and moved here to be closer to her parents, which allowed Teddy to spend more time with his grandparents, who could also help out with childcare. I told Carol that I grew up in foster care and returned to this area after my time in the Marines and finishing college because Vera had been offered a great position at a top accounting firm. I followed her since it was easier for me to find a teaching job here than for her to find a similar opportunity elsewhere. Plus, my last adoptive parents, who I consider my real parents, live nearby. The kids were starting to get tired, so we decided to wrap things up for the day. I told Carol about Maria and mentioned that I would be happy to help care for Teddy if she ever needed someone for a short time. My teaching schedule gives me the summers off, and during the school year, I usually get home by 4 p.m., with Maria here from 7 in the morning until I return. Carol seemed pleased with the offer, especially since she worked one evening a week until 8 p.m. After a while, everything settled down. Carol and Teddy went home, and I bathed the kids, read them stories, and kissed Violet and Samuel goodnight. There was definitely a spark between me and Carol, but I was still processing the loss of Vera. I wasn't ready for a new relationship, especially given how my marriage to Vera ended. But it had been 5 years since I had been with a woman, and as the conversation with Carol continued, I started noticing signs of interest from her, though she didn't seem to show any on her end. Still, the loss of her husband was much more recent than Vera's disappearance, so I decided to wait and see what happened. Over the next few months, Carol's family and mine started blending together. Teddy became a regular in our backyard, and Violet's best friend in kindergarten. I stopped by a few times to help with minor repairs around Carol's house. We had dinner with the kids at least once a week, and on weekends we spent hours together, enjoying a glass of wine and watching the children play. It was nearly Christmas when I finally gathered the courage to ask her out. I hoped I wasn't misreading the signals I thought she was giving me. We began spending more time together, driving to the kids' school events and just hanging out. I didn't want to rush things from friendship to something more, but I also knew that if I didn't ask, I might miss the chance, and someone else could step in and steal her affection. So one day, after walking Teddy home, I mustered the courage to ring her doorbell. Carol had just come back from the library and was still in her business casual outfit. She had that sexy librarian look, professional attire, a blouse unbuttoned just enough to show some cleavage, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. My heart skipped a beat, but fortunately, the jeans I was wearing were tight enough to hide my reaction. "Hi, how's it going? Was Teddy good today?" I asked. "He was great as usual," she replied. "He and Violet did their homework, and then all 3 of the kids spent the rest of the time outside." "I actually came by because I wanted to ask you something," I said. "If I can find a babysitter or have Maria watch the kids on Saturday night, would you be interested in going out for dinner and a movie? Just the 2 of us. An adults-only night?" Carol laughed. "Well, it's about time. I was starting to wonder if you were ever going to ask me out. I was going to give you until the holidays, and if you didn't make a move, I was going to invite you myself. Of course, I'd love to go on a date with you. We've been dancing around this for months now. What time should I be ready on Saturday?" "Let me sort things out with the sitter, and I'll get back to you," I said. I wished her good night and nearly floated back across the lawn to my house. Maria was happy to work overtime, especially since she'd been pushing me to start dating again. She had met Carol and liked her, and accepted Teddy as her grandson. After confirming the babysitting arrangements, I told Carol I'd pick her up at 6 on Saturday. We'll go to this great Italian place I've been to a lot, then catch a new movie at the AMC. When I knocked on her door that Saturday, I was nervous, like a schoolboy on his first date. Carol opened the door, and I froze. She was wearing a white blouse, almost sheer, that showed off a lace bra supporting her beautiful bosoms. The pants she wore hugged her hips perfectly, and when she turned around, they accentuated her shapely figure. "Wow," was all I could say. She took my hand and we walked to the car. I opened the door for her and watched her slide in before closing it and walking around to the driver's side. Finally, I regained my composure and said, "Oh my God, if I'd known you looked this good, I wouldn't have waited so long. You look absolutely stunning." Carol chuckled. "You've been checking out my bump for months. Don't think I didn't notice. And by the way, you look pretty good yourself. Looks like your running and martial arts are paying off." The evening passed quickly. As we sat in the cinema, Carol took my hand and rested her head on my shoulder. I leaned down and kissed her, and she responded warmly. Luckily, we were sitting far enough back that we didn't attract attention. After the movie, we went to a local bar with live jazz and spent an hour enjoying the music and talking. When we left, we walked to the car with our arms around each other. I felt the evening had gone well, and I was sure Carol did too, since she asked when we could do it again. I promised we'd plan another night soon. This marked the beginning of the third saving grace in my life, one that brought me the unconditional love that Vera could never give. We were careful around the kids, but when they were busy outside or asleep, Carol and I acted like two teenagers. We didn't sleep together right away, but we spent a lot of time together. After 2 months of this, I arranged for Maria to watch all 3 kids so Carol and I could get away for the weekend. We booked a romantic hotel in Lancaster County and left right after school. That Friday, we dined at a wonderful French restaurant in Lancaster, then headed to the guest house. When we entered the room, Carol disappeared with a small bag and came out wearing lingerie, garter belt, stockings, lace teddy, and high heels. I was stunned, and well, little Davy stood at attention. We spent the night making love, and though we'd both had a break, neither of us seemed to have forgotten how to please the other. Carol was loud, and I was sure the neighbors must have heard everything. At one point, I thought someone might call the cops. We finally fell asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, we made sure to put the "Do Not Disturb" sign up, giving us time to enjoy each other before checking out. From that point on, we were officially a couple. I introduced Carol and Teddy to the Hopkinses, who gave their approval, as did Carol's parents. We spent every free moment together, and after discussing our relationship with the kids, we started spending nights together. By Memorial Day, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with Carol. After speaking with Carol's father and getting his blessing, I proposed to her at the restaurant where we had our first date. Her yes was so loud it turned heads around the room. Neither of us wanted a big wedding, so we decided on an outdoor ceremony at a local park, followed by a reception at a pavilion with food. The guest list included our families, the Hopkinses, our kids, Maria, and a few close friends. Maria agreed to watch the kids while we honeymooned in the Caribbean. Before the wedding, I told Carol the whole story about Vera, the trust for Violet and Samuel, and the necklace I gave Vera that first Christmas. We discussed adopting each other's children and agreed we wanted at least one more child of our own. Soon after our honeymoon, Carol found out she was pregnant. One of her medications had affected her birth control pills, and she worried I'd be upset, but I was thrilled. 9 months later, baby George David was born, followed by Margaret Ann 2 years after. We decided to stop there. Carol took a leave of absence to raise the children while I continued teaching. With 5 kids now, we realized we needed more space, so we bought a large Victorian house with a big yard just outside the city center. We renovated it, selling both of our old homes to finance the project. We moved in shortly after we learned we were expecting Margaret. Soon after, I discovered that Vera had left me one final gift. The gift was incredible. I hired a lawyer to draft adoption petitions, wills, and powers of attorney for Carol and me, in preparation for distributing the inheritance. I told him I wanted Teddy to inherit nearly everything, as Violet and Samuel were already well taken care of through Vera's trust. He asked for a copy of the trust to reference it properly in our wills, explaining why our assets weren't split equally among the children. After reviewing the document for a few days, he called me. "Davy, did you actually read the trust?" he asked. "No, I haven't," I replied. "The bank manages all of Vera's money. I don't need to access the trust funds for Violet and Samuel, and I won't until they go to college." "Why?" "Well," he said, "I found something in the trust that might affect your estate plans. Vera included a clause that adds beneficiaries if you end up raising Violet and Samuel. It says any children born to or adopted by you, or stepchildren under 18 when you married their mother, will be added as beneficiaries." So Teddy will remain your stepson after the adoption, and any children you have with Carol will also benefit. She really thought this through, he added. She took care of your kids, even after her passing. I was stunned. The woman who had told me she couldn't love me the way I deserved and urged me to move on without her had ensured that the children I raised would be cared for. She made sure they would never know the insecurity she herself had experienced as a child. I was deeply moved by how much she cared for my children, even from beyond the grave. Carol and I updated our estate plans, and thanks to Vera's generosity, our 5 children will always be provided for. Now I'm sitting on the porch, watching our older kids play in the yard. Carol is nestled in my lap, resting her head on my shoulder. Margaret sleeps peacefully in her carrier. As I reflect on my life, I realize how lucky I am. I'm grateful to the Hopkinses for helping me twice when I was at my lowest, to my beautiful wife for rescuing me from single parenthood, and to Vera for her generosity toward our children. I still can't fully forgive her, but I understand her actions. She was shaped by a broken system, yet in the end, she made one final gesture that, if not love, was at least a recognition of my love for her. May she rest in peace.